In the misty lanes of St. Mary Mead, 1928, a fortune in gold vanishes from Grayson Manor's safe, and the trusted valet, Robert Finch, disappears. Enter Miss Jane Marple, a spinster with a razor-sharp mind, unravelling a web of greed and betrayal. Was Finch a thief or a pawn? As buried ingots surface and a scarred stranger stalks the village, Marple exposes a desperate nephew's plot, a London blackmailer's grip, and a sister's hidden fear. In this tale of loyalty and deception, one truth shines, no secret escapes Miss Marple's gaze. Chapter 1. The Glint of Greed. The village of St. Mary Mead lay nestled in a gentle fold of the Downs, its thatched cottages and winding lanes bathed in the pale mist of a November morning in 1928. The air carried the damp chill of autumn, and the River Mead, swollen from recent rains, murmured softly as it wound past the churchyard. To an outsider, the village might seem a postcard of English tranquillity, but to its residents it was a tapestry of small dramas, woven daily by whispers and watchful eyes. At the heart of the morning's commotion stood Grayson Manor, a Georgian pile of honey-coloured stone, its chimneys puffing smoke against the fog. Sir Henry Grayson, its widowed master, was a man whose wealth had outlived his warmth. His days spent cataloguing rare coins and precious metals in a study that smelled of wax and old money. His latest pride was a collection of 10 gold ingots, each a kilogram of gleaming bullion, stamped with a lion's head by his private assayer in London. They were locked in a steel safe, a modern fortress hidden behind a portrait of his late wife, whose painted eyes seemed to guard the treasure with melancholic vigilance. By 8 o'clock, the manor was in uproar. The safe stood ajar, its velvet lined, interior empty. The ingots were gone, and with them Robert Finch, Sir Henry's valet of 5 years, a man known for his quiet efficiency and soldier's discipline. The housemaid, Elsie, had found the study door unlocked at dawn, the safe's betrayal glinting in the morning light. She'd screamed, rousing the household, and Sir Henry, still in his dressing gown, had stormed in, his bellows shaking the crystal chandelier. "Robbed!" he roared, his face a mottled crimson. "My gold, my fortune, stolen! And Finch, that snake, nowhere to be found." The news spread like wildfire, carried by the milkman to the Blue Boar Inn, where it ignited the village's gossip. By 10, it reached the cottage of Miss Jane Marple, a spinster of indeterminate age, whose frail appearance belied a mind as sharp as a paring knife. She sat by her parlour window, knitting a pale blue shawl, her fingers moving with the steady rhythm of habit. Outside, the rose bushes she tended with care drooped under the mist, their petals scattered like clues on the damp earth. Her maid, Lily, burst in, cheeks flushed from the cold and the thrill of scandal. "Oh, Miss Marple, have you heard? Sir Henry's been robbed. Gold ingots gone, and his valets vanished. Clean out of St. Mary Mead, they say." Miss Marple's needles paused, her pale blue eyes lifting from the wool. "Vanished, Lily. That's a strong word. People don't vanish without reason." Her voice was soft, almost absent, but it carried the weight of observation honed by years of watching human nature unfold in the village's quiet corners. Lily perched on a chair, eager to spill the details. "Mrs. Bantry says Finch took the gold and caught the midnight train to Dover. Off to the continent, she reckons, to live like a king. And Mr. Pye at the post office swears he saw Finch looking shifty last week, posting a letter to London. Miss Gill. Marple resumed her knitting, the click of her needles a metronome to her thoughts. Mrs. Bantry does love a romance, and Mr. Pye sees shiftiness in anyone who buys a stamp. But gold, Lily, is heavy. 10 kilograms would not slip easily into a valise. She pictured Robert Finch, whom she'd seen at church. Tall, reserved, with the upright posture of a man who'd served in the Great War. His eyes had been guarded, his speech spare, but there was no malice in him, or so she'd thought. "What do you make of it, miss?" Lily asked, leaning forward. Miss Marple tilted her head, as if consulting an invisible ledger of village life. "I make nothing yet, Lily, but I recall a theft in Chipping Cleghorn, years ago. A silver teapot, taken by a maid who vanished, to her cousin's attic. People assume flight, but sometimes it's a performance." Her lips curved faintly, not quite a smile. "We shall see." By noon, Sir Henry, desperate for any ally, sent a note inviting Miss Marple to the manor. "Your knack for puzzles, Miss Marple," he wrote, "might shed light on this devilry." She folded the note, donned her black felt hat, and set out, her umbrella tapping the cobbles like a third foot. The village watched her go, some with amusement, others with a quiet faith in the spinster who saw what others missed. As she approached Grayson Manor, the fog parted briefly, revealing the house's stern facade. A crow cawed from the yew trees, and Miss Marple felt a prickle of unease. Theft was common enough, but this one had a theatrical air. A safe left open, a valet gone without trace. It was, she thought, like a novel by Mrs. Christie herself, where the obvious answer was rarely the true one. She tightened her grip on her umbrella and stepped into the manor, ready to unravel the threads of greed that glittered beneath the surface. Chapter 2. The Empty Safe. The fog clung to Grayson Manor like a conspirator as Miss Jane Marple ascended the stone steps, her black umbrella furled but held firmly in her gloved hand. The great oak door creaked open, revealing Elsie, the housemaid, whose eyes were red-rimmed from excitement or tears. She bobbed a curtsy, muttering, "This way, ma'am," and led Miss Marple through a hall lined with ancestral portraits, their gazes stern and unyielding. The air was heavy with the scent of beeswax and the faint tang of Sir Henry's cigar smoke, a reminder of wealth now marred by betrayal. Sir Henry awaited in his study, a room that seemed to wear its opulence like armour. Oak panels gleamed under. The light of a chandelier and a marble fireplace crackled with a fire that did little to warm the chill of outrage in the air. Shelves of leather-bound books, their spines uncreased, suggested a man who valued appearance over scholarship. At the room's heart stood the violated safe, built into the wall behind a portrait of Lady Grayson, whose serene face seemed to mourn the loss below. The safe's steel door hung open, its interior a stark void save for a single velvet cloth, crumpled like a discarded promise. Sir Henry, pacing in a burgundy smoking jacket, turned as Miss Marple entered. His florid face was a map of fury, his moustache quivering with each word. "Miss Marple, thank heaven you're here! A catastrophe, an absolute catastrophe. 10 ingots, my life's security, stolen, and that scoundrel Finch, gone like a thief in the night. He gestured wildly at the safe, as if its emptiness might speak for itself. Miss Marple inclined her head, her expression one of polite concern. "A great shock, Sir Henry. May I?" She stepped forward, her small figure almost lost in the room's grandeur, and bent to examine the safe. Her eyes, sharp as a hawk's, traced its edges. The lock was pristine, its brass gleaming without, a hint of scratches or dents. The hinges moved smoothly, whispering of careful craftsmanship. She touched the velvet cloth, noting its faint dust, undisturbed by violence. "No signs of force," she murmured, half to herself. "Most curious." Constable Hargreaves, a lanky man with a notebook clutched like a shield, cleared his throat. He stood by the desk, his uniform slightly too large, as if he hoped to grow into his authority. "Plain as day, ma'am. Finch had the combination. Sir Henry trusted him with it. He opened the safe, took the gold, and bolted. Probably halfway to France by now." Miss Marple's lips twitched, a fleeting shadow of amusement. "Perhaps, Constable, but an open safe is rather ostentatious, don't you think? A thief might prefer to lock it, to delay discovery." She straightened, her gaze drifting to the window, its heavy drapes drawn back to reveal a view of the fog-shrouded lawn. The latch was secure, the glass unmarred. She crossed to the carpet, her sensible shoes silent, and studied its deep pile. No footprints, no scuffs, only the faint indentation of Sir Henry's pacing. Sir Henry threw up his hands. "What does it matter, locked or open? The gold's gone. Finch knew its value, handled the safe's maintenance himself. I should have seen his greed. The quiet ones are always the worst." Miss Marple turned, her voice gentle but precise, like a needle threading silk. "Quiet men, Sir Henry, are often misjudged. Tell me, when did you last see Mr. Finch?" "Yesterday evening," Sir Henry said, sinking into a leather chair. "After dinner. He brought me my brandy, as usual, then said he'd check the safe's lock. Routine, he called it. Seemed normal, not a word out of place. This morning, Elsie found the study unlocked, the safe bare, and Finch's room empty." Miss Marple nodded, filing the details away. Routine, she thought, was a cloak for opportunity. She glanced at the portrait above the safe, Lady Grayson's eyes meeting hers with a painted stillness. And the study door, was it locked last night? Sir Henry frowned, rubbing his temple. "I locked it myself, as always. The key stays in my pocket. Elsie swears she found it unlocked at dawn, but the lock wasn't forced. Only Finch had a spare key for his duties." Constable Hargreaves scribbled furiously, then looked up. "That clinches it, ma'am. Finch used his key, opened the safe, and made off with the lot." Miss Marple's eyes lingered on the door's brass lock, its surface unblemished. "A spare key," she said softly, "is a dangerous thing." She moved to the desk, where a decanter of brandy sat beside a single glass, its rim faintly smudged. Her fingers hovered over a silver cigarette case, engraved with Sir Henry's initials, then withdrew. Every object she knew held a story, but this room's tale was incomplete. "Sir Henry," she said, turning, "who else knew of the ingots' value? They are not, I imagine, common knowledge." He hesitated, his bluster fading. "My nephew, Lawrence, knew. They're part of my estate, after all. And the staff, to some extent. Finch, of course, handled their care. But I trusted them, Miss Marple. Trusted them all. Trust, Miss Marple thought, was a fragile currency. She recalled a theft in St. Mary Mead, a vicar's alms box pilfered by a choir boy who left the lid ajar to blame a vagrant. This safe, so brazenly exposed, felt like a stage set, its props arranged for an audience. But whose? "Thank you, Sir Henry," she said, her tone as mild as milk. "I shall think on this. Constable, might I see Mr. Finch's quarters later? Small things often speak loudly." Hargreaves nodded, though his expression suggested he thought her request quaint. Sir Henry, exhausted, waved a hand. "Do what? You must, Miss Marple. I want my gold back, and that traitor found." As she left the study, Miss Marple paused in the hall, glancing at a barometer on the wall. Its needle hovered at storm. She smiled faintly. Storms, in her experience, revealed what calm concealed. The empty safe was a beginning, not an end, and in its silence she sensed the first threads of a pattern, delicate, deliberate, and waiting to be unravelled. Chapter 3. The Valets Shadow. The fog had thickened by the time Miss Jane Marple left Grayson Manor, its damp tendrils curling around the yew trees that lined the drive. Her umbrella, now unfurled, bobbed like a black mushroom as she made her way back to St. Mary Mead's heart, her mind sifting the morning's revelations. The open safe, the unforced lock, Sir Henry's bluster, all were pieces of a puzzle. But it was Robert Finch's absence that cast the longest shadow. A man did not vanish without leaving some trace, she thought, unless the vanishing was itself a design. And designs, in her experience, were rarely as simple as they seemed. She paused at the village green, where the war memorial stood, its bronze soldier gazing stoically into the mist. Robert Finch had been a soldier, Sir Henry had said, returning from the trenches with a quietness that bordered on invisibility. Miss Marple's nephew Raymond had once spoken of such men, survivors who carried their scars in silence, their lives shaped by discipline and loss. What, she wondered, had shaped Finch's silence? And what had driven him to flee, or be made to seem so? Her destination was the Blue Boar Inn, but first she detoured to the vicarage, where Mrs. Clement, the vicar's wife, was known to collect scraps of village life as eagerly as Miss Marple collected rose clippings. The vicarage gate squeaked as she entered, and Mrs. Clement, a plump woman with a perpetually flustered air, welcomed her into a parlour cluttered with hymnals and half-finished embroidery. "Jane, how dreadful about Sir Henry!" Mrs. Clement exclaimed, pouring tea from a chipped pot. "Gold stolen, and that nice Mr. Finch gone. The village is all aflutter. Mrs. Bantry says he's halfway to Rio by now." Miss Marple accepted a cup, her smile faint but encouraging. "Mrs. Bantry does have a flair for the exotic. But I wonder, Margaret, have you seen Mr. Finch lately? A small detail might help." Mrs. Clement's brow furrowed, her fingers twisting a lace handkerchief. "Well, now you mention it, I did see him 2 evenings ago near the churchyard. It was dusk, and I was fetching the vicar's scarf from the vestry. Mr. Finch was walking briskly, carrying a sack over his shoulder. I thought it odd. He's so proper, not the sort to carry sacks like a labourer, but I didn't think much of it until now." Miss Marple's eyes sharpened, though her voice remained soft. "A sack, you say? Heavy, perhaps?" "It looked heavy." Mrs. Clement said, nodding. His shoulders were hunched, as if it weighed him down. He didn't see me, just hurried towards the river path. I meant to mention it to the vicar, but with the bizarre planning, it slipped my mind. The river path, Miss Marple noted, led to secluded spots, old fishing huts, overgrown thickets, places where a man might hide something, or himself. She sipped her tea, the porcelain warm against her fingers. And his manner? Was he agitated? Mrs. Clement considered. Not agitated. Exactly. Purposeful, I'd say, like a man with a task. Oh, Jane, do you think he was hiding the gold? I think, Miss Marple said, setting her cup down, that Mr. Finch's actions are a thread worth following. Thank you, Margaret. You've been most helpful. Leaving the vicarage, she made her way to the Blue Boar Inn, its timbered facade looming through the fog like a ship in harbour. The inn was St. Mary Mead's pulse, where farmers, shopkeepers, and gossips mingled over pints and shepherd's pie. Inside, the air was thick with tobacco and the hum of voices all circling the Manners scandal. Miss Marple settled at a corner table, her black hat and shawl blending into the shadows, and ordered a pot of tea from Elsie, the barmaid, whose quick tongue was as much a fixture as the oak beams. Elsie, wiping her hands on her apron, leaned in. Terrible business, Miss Marple. Mr. Finch, of all people, always so polite, never a cross word. Had his pint here every Saturday, regular as the church bell, but kept to himself. Last I saw him was 4 days ago, sitting by the fire, reading a letter. Looked troubled, if you ask me. Miss Marple's needles, produced from her bag, began their quiet dance. A letter, Elsie. Did you see who it was from? Elsie shook her head. No, ma'am, but it was on fine paper with a red seal. He tucked it away quick when I brought his pint. Didn't talk much after, just stared at the fire. A red seal, Miss Marple thought, suggested formality or secrecy. She recalled a case in St. Mary Mead, a stolen will hidden in a letter with a wax seal, its sender revealed by a postmark. And his habits, Elsie? Did he meet anyone here? Never, Elsie said firmly. Always alone, left by 9 sharp. Though Mr. Pye at the post office said he saw Finch posting a letter to London the day before he vanished. Swears it was, to a woman. Saw the name Clara on the envelope. Claraara Finch, Miss Marple remembered. Robert's sister in Bloomsbury. The postmaster's sharp eyes missed little, though his tongue often embroidered the truth. She thanked Elsie, her mind turning to the letter Finch had read. Was it from Clara, or someone else? And why had it troubled him? As Elsie moved off, Miss Marple's gaze drifted to the inn's patrons. At a nearby table, Mr. Pye, the postmaster, held court, his spectacles glinting as he recounted Finch's shifty behaviour. Across the room, Mrs. Bantry, dining with her husband, Colonel Bantry, caught Miss Marple's eye and waved her over. Reluctantly, Miss Marple joined them, knowing Dolly Bantry's chatter would be a torrent, but possibly revealing. "Jane, you're sleuthing, I can tell," Mrs. Bantry said, her voice carrying over the din. "It's straight out of a novel. Gold, a missing valet, a dash to the continent. I say Finch sold the ingots in Paris and is sipping champagne as we speak." Colonel Bantry, a ruddy man with a soldier's bearing, grunted. "Nonsense, Dolly. Gold's heavy. 10 kilos would slow a man down. He'd need a cart, not a suitcase. My bet's on a local hideout." Miss Marple's lips curved faintly. "An interesting point, Colonel. Gold is indeed cumbersome. And Mr. Finch, I'm told, was seen with a heavy sack 2 evenings ago near the churchyard." Mrs. Bantry's eyes widened. "The churchyard! How sinister! He's buried the gold, Mark my words, and fled to avoid suspicion. Or," Miss Marple said mildly, "someone wishes us to think so. Buried treasure is rather theatrical, don't you find?" She sipped her tea, her mind on the churchyard's yews and crypts, places where shadows held secrets. The Colonel's remark about weight lingered. 10 kilograms was no trifle, yet Finch had carried a sack alone. Was it gold or something else? The conversation turned to village matters, but Miss Marple's attention wandered. She recalled Sir Henry's mention of Finch's war service, his reserved nature, his sister in London. A man like Finch, disciplined and solitary, did not strike her as one to steal for greed. Yet the letter Elsie described, the sack Mrs. Clement saw, suggested a man with a purpose, perhaps not his own. She thought of a theft in Danemouth, where a butler had been coerced into stealing jewels to protect a loved one. Coercion, she knew, could bend even the strongest will. Leaving the inn, Miss Marple walked to the post office, where Mr. Pye, polishing his counter, greeted her with a knowing nod. "Heard you're helping Sir Henry, Miss Marple. Nasty business. Finch posted a letter to London day before he vanished, addressed to a Miss Claraara Finch, Bloomsbury. I saw it clear as day." Miss Marple's eyes met his, steady and unblinking. "And his demeanour, Mr. Pye? Was he anxious?" Pye puffed out his chest. "Shifty, I'd say. Kept looking over his shoulder, like he expected trouble. Paid for express. Post, too. Costly for a valet." Express post, Miss Marple noted, implied urgency. She thanked Pye and stepped into the street, the fog now a heavy veil. Claraara Finch was a thread to pull. But first she needed to see Finch's quarters. She sent a note to Sir Henry, requesting access, and by late afternoon she stood in the stable yard of Grayson Manor, where a narrow staircase led to the valet's room. The room was Spartan, a soldier's cell in all but name. A single bed, its blanket tucked with military precision, stood against one wall. A nightstand held a worn Bible, its pages edged with use, and a lamp with a cracked shade. A wardrobe contained a single suit, pressed and sombre, and a pair of polished shoes. On the dresser sat a photograph in a plain frame. A young woman, her face soft but shadowed with worry, inscribed, "To Robert, with love, Clara." No overcoat, no boots, as Sir Henry had noted, but the room's order struck Miss Marple as telling. A man fleeing in haste would leave disarray. A spilled drawer, a crumpled shirt. This room spoke of control, not panic. She opened the Bible, finding a pressed violet between its pages and a faint pencil mark beside a verse. "The truth shall make you free." Her fingers lingered on the page. Sentiment or a message? She examined the photograph, noting Clara's anxious eyes, and checked the frame's back. Nothing. The wardrobe's pockets were empty, the floorboards firm. Yet the room felt staged, like the safe, its neatness a deliberate mask. As she descended the stairs, Constable Hargreaves met her, his notebook ever present. "Find anything, ma'am?" Looks like Finch packed light and ran." Miss Marple's umbrella tapped the ground. "Packed light, perhaps, but ran? I'm not so sure, Constable. A man's room is his mirror, and this one reflects order, not flight." She glanced at the stables where a groom brushed a horse, its breath steaming in the cold. "Tell me, did Mr. Finch have visitors recently, or did he leave the manor often?" Hargreaves scratched his chin. "The groom says Finch kept to himself, but he did walk to the village now and then, church, the inn, the post office. No visitors, far as anyone knows. Sir Henry's nephew, Mr. Lawrence, was here last week, though. He and Finch spoke once, out by the gate. Looked tense, the groom said." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. Lawrence Grayson, the charming nephew with debts, was a figure worth watching. She recalled his restless hands at the manor, his tailored suit despite his poverty. "Tense," she murmured. "How interesting." As she left the manor, the fog was lifting, revealing the river's gleam in the distance, the churchyard, the river path, Clara's letter, Lawrence's presence. The threads were multiplying, each tugging at a hidden knot. Miss Marple walked home, her steps measured, her mind weaving a pattern. Robert Finch was no ordinary thief, if a thief at all. His shadow, she sensed, hid another's hand, and in St. Mary Mead, where secrets bloomed like weeds, she would find it. Back at her cottage, she lit a fire and sat by the hearth. Her knitting resumed. Lily, bringing a tray of scones, chattered about the village's latest theories. Finch as a master criminal, Finch as a victim. Miss Marple listened, her needles clicking. "People love a story, Lily," she said, "but the truth is quieter and often closer to home." She opened her writing desk and penned a letter to Inspector Dermot Craddock, her old friend at Scotland Yard, requesting discreet inquiries about Claraara Finch and any whispers of gold in London's underbelly. Mutuccio, Valets Shadow was long, but Miss Marple knew shadows were cast by light, and light, in time, would reveal all. Chapter 4. The Village Whispers. The fog that had draped St. Mary Mead in a shroud of secrecy began to dissipate by the following morning, leaving the village bathed in a weak, silvery light that did little to dispel the chill of November 1928. Miss Jane Marple, seated at her breakfast table with a pot of Earl Grey and a slice of toast, gazed out at her garden, where the last chrysanthemums bowed under the weight of dew. Her mind, however, was far from horticulture. The theft at Grayson Manor, with its opened safe and missing valet, was a tapestry of contradictions, and the threads she had gathered, Robert Finch's orderly room, the heavy sack in the churchyard, the letter with a red seal, were yet to form a coherent pattern. The village, she knew, was a loom of gossip, and today she intended to collect its warp and weft. Her maid, Lily, bustled in, her apron slightly askew, her eyes alight with the morning's chatter. "Miss Marple, the whole village is talking. They say Mr. Finch is a master thief, trained in the war to crack safes. Mrs. Price at the bakery swears he's hiding in a smuggling den by the coast." Miss Marple's lips twitched, a flicker of amusement crossing her delicate features. "Mrs. Price does enjoy her penny dreadfuls, Lily, but smuggling dens are rather dramatic for a man who polished shoes with such precision. Have you heard anything less theatrical?" Lily set down a fresh pot of tea, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Well, miss, the milkman says he saw Mr. Finch 2 nights before he vanished, walking by the river with a lantern. Looked like he was searching for something, not hiding it, and Mrs. Bantry's maid told me Sir Henry's nephew, Mr. Lawrence, was at the manor the day before the theft, asking for money again. Miss Marple's needles, resting in a basket by her chair, seemed to beckon, but she resisted, her fingers instead tracing the rim of her teacup. Lawrence Grayson's name, surfacing again, was a note that jarred the melody of her thoughts. A spendthrift nephew, tense words with Finch, a tailored suit despite debts. These were not mere coincidences, and the lantern by the river, a detail new and sharp, suggested Finch's purpose was more complex than flight. She thanked Lily, her mind already charting her morning's course. The Blue Boar Inn, the church, and perhaps a word with the milkman himself. By 10 o'clock, Miss Marple, clad in her black coat and felt hat, stepped into the village, her umbrella a steadfast companion despite the clearing sky. St. Mary Mead was awake, its lanes alive with the clatter of carts and the murmur of voices. She passed the butcher's, where Mr. Hodge leaned over his counter, proclaiming Finch's guilt to a knot of customers, and the haberdashery, where Miss Hartnell, peering through her pince-nez, declared the theft a sign of moral decay. Miss Marple nodded politely, her ears attuned to the undercurrents of speculation, each voice adding a thread to her weave. Her first stop was the Blue Boar Inn, its sign creaking in the breeze. The inn's taproom was quieter than the previous day, its patrons mostly farmers, nursing early pints and discussing the price of wool. Elsie, the barmaid, spotted Miss Marple and hurried over, wiping her hands on her apron. "Back again, Miss Marple. The village won't stop about Mr. Finch. They're saying he had a secret lover in London, and the gold was for her." Miss Marple settled at her corner table, her shawl draped over the chair. "A secret lover, Elsie? That's a new tale. I thought yesterday you mentioned a letter he read here, with a red seal. Did he ever speak of a woman?" Elsie shook her head, pouring tea from a dented pot. "Not a word, ma'am. But that letter, 4 days ago it was, made him quiet. He sat by the fire, reading it over and over, then folded it careful, like it was precious. I didn't see the writing, but the seal was wax, red as blood, with a crest or some such. He left soon after, earlier than usual." Miss Marple's eyes, pale and piercing, held Elsie's for a moment. A crest suggested wealth or status, not the sort of thing a valet's sister in Bloomsbury might use. "And his manner, Elsie? Beyond quiet. Did he seem afraid or angry?" Elsie frowned, her hands twisting her apron. "Not afraid, I'd say. Determined, maybe. Like he'd made up his mind about something hard. Oh, and Mr. Pye was in yesterday, saying Finch posted that letter to London the next day. To his sister, Clara. Express post, costly for a valet." Miss Marple nodded, her mind filing the detail alongside the milkman's lantern sighting. Finch's actions, reading a sealed letter, posting an urgent reply, walking the river by night, painted a man caught in a web, not weaving one. She thanked Elsie and sipped her tea, her gaze drifting to the taproom's hearth, where Finch had sat. The fire was unlit now, its ashes cold, but she pictured him there, his face shadowed by decision. Her next destination was the church, a Norman structure whose tower loomed over the village like a silent sentinel. The churchyard, where Mrs. Clement had seen Finch with his sack, was her true goal. But first she sought the verger, Mr. Timms, a stooped man with a memory for faces and footsteps. She found him polishing the brass lectern, his cloth moving with the rhythm of habit. "Good morning, Mr. Timms," Miss Marple said, her voice soft but clear. "I'm looking into the trouble at Grayson Manor. Mrs. Clement mentioned seeing Mr. Finch in the churchyard 2 evenings ago with a sack. Have you noticed him there recently?" Mr. Timms paused, his rheumy eyes narrowing. "Finch, eh? Aye, I saw him that night, just as Mrs. Clement said. Dusk it was, and I was locking the vestry. He was by the old crypt, the one nobody uses, carrying a sack over his shoulder. Heavy by the look of it. His boots sank deep in the mud. Didn't stop to talk, just nodded and went toward the river path. Thought it queer, him being a valet, not a gravedigger." Miss Marple's umbrella tapped the stone floor gently. "The old crypt, you say? Did he linger there, or seem to be hiding something?" "Not hiding, ma'am," Tim said, resuming his polishing. "More like checking. He looked at the crypt door, then moved on quick. I didn't follow, had my own work, but I'll tell you, Miss Marple, that crypt's been locked since the war. Nobody goes in, not even the vicar." Miss Marple thanked him, her mind on the crypt's padlocked door and Finch's purposeful stride. The churchyard, with its ancient yews and tilting stones, was a place of secrets, and she resolved to examine it herself. As she stepped outside, the air was crisp, the sky a pale blue streaked with clouds. The churchyard was quiet, save for a blackbird's trill, and she walked slowly, her eyes scanning the ground. Near the crypt, a moss-covered relic of some forgotten family, she found what Timms described: boot prints, deep and broad in the soft earth. They led toward the river path, then faded on harder ground. The crypt's door, rusted but secure, showed no signs of tampering, its padlock heavy with age. She knelt, her gloved fingers brushing the soil. No fresh digging, no disturbed stones, but the boot prints were deliberate, not hurried. Finch had carried something heavy, but had he hidden it here or elsewhere? She recalled a case in St. Mary Mead, a stolen chalice buried under a yew, its thief betrayed by a single footprint. The churchyard held a clue, she was certain, but its secret was not yet ready to speak. Her next stop was the milkman, Tom Baker, whose route took him past the river each dawn. She found him at the dairy, loading his cart, his cap tilted back, on a head of sandy hair. "Morning, Miss Marple," he said, grinning. "Heard you're sniffing out Sir Henry's gold. What's the word?" Miss Marple smiled, her manner disarming. "Only whispers, Tom. Lily mentioned you saw Mr. Finch by the river 2 nights before he vanished, with a lantern. Could you tell me more?" Tom leaned against his cart, his grin fading. "Aye, I saw him. Dawn it was, just before my rounds. He was by the old oak, where the river bends. Had a lantern swinging low, like he was looking for something in the grass. Didn't see no sack, mind, just him, crouching now and then. I called out, but he didn't hear, or didn't want to. Looked not scared, but focused. Then he moved off toward the fishing huts." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed, though her face remained serene. The old oak, the fishing huts, places of solitude where a man might conceal or seek. "And his lantern, Tom, did it flicker as if he was digging?" Tom shook his head. "Steady as a star, ma'am. He wasn't digging, just searching. Odd, for a valet out at dawn like that. I told Constable Hargreaves, but he says Finch is long gone." Miss Marple thanked him, her mind racing. Finch's lantern, his search by the river, suggested a man following a trail, not laying one. Had he been looking for the gold, or something else? The letter with the red seal loomed in her thoughts, its crest a tantalizing mystery. She recalled her nephew Raymond's tales of wartime espionage, where sealed letters carried coded orders. Was Finch entangled in something larger than theft? Returning to the village centre, she passed the Blue Boar again, where Mrs. Bantry emerged, her fox fur gleaming in the sunlight. "Jane, you're everywhere," she exclaimed, linking arms with Miss Marple. "Come, walk with me to the post office. I'm dying to hear your thoughts on this Finch business. I say he's in South America by now, living like a nabob." Miss Marple allowed herself to be steered, her steps matching Mrs. Bantry's brisk pace. "South America is a long way, Dolly. And gold, as Colonel Bantry noted, is heavy. 10 kilograms would require planning, not just a steamer ticket." Mrs. Bantry laughed, her voice carrying, "Oh, you and your logic! But you're right, gold's a burden. Still, Finch had the combination, the key, the chance. Who else could it be? Not Sir Henry's nephew, surely. Lawrence is a rogue, but not a thief." Miss Marple's lips pursed, a faint sign of her inner calculations. "Lawrence was at the manor, I understand, the day before the theft, and he spoke with Finch tensely by the gate. Small things, Dolly, but they add up." Mrs. Bantry stopped, her eyes wide. "Jane, you're not suggesting Lawrence stole the gold. He's a wastrel, yes, but Sir Henry's heir. Oh, this is too delicious. You must tell me more." Miss Marple demurred, her voice gentle. "I suggest nothing yet, Dolly. But people, like villages, have layers. We must peel them carefully." They reached the post office, where Mr. Pye, polishing his spectacles, greeted them with a nod. Miss Marple seized the chance to probe further. "Mr. Pye," she said, "you mentioned Mr. Finch posting a letter to his sister Clara the day before his disappearance. Did he post anything else recently, or receive any letters?" Pye adjusted his spectacles, relishing the attention. "Just the one to Clara, ma'am, express post. But now you ask, he did collect a letter 3 days before, a thick one, with a red wax seal. Came from London, but I couldn't see the sender. He signed for it quick and left, looking like he'd swallowed a lemon." Miss Marple's heart quickened, though her face betrayed nothing. "The letter Elsie described now confirmed. And the seal, Mr. Pye, did you notice any design?" "A crest, I think," Pye said, squinting. "Maybe a lion or a griffin. Hard to tell. It was smudged, but it wasn't Clara's. She writes plain envelopes." Miss Marple thanked him, her mind alight. A crest, a lion or griffin suggested wealth, power, or an institution. Not Clara, not a lover, but perhaps a threat, or a promise. She parted from Mrs. Bantry, who was already spinning theories, and walked home, the village's whispers echoing in her ears. At her cottage she lit a fire and sat by the hearth. Her knitting resumed. The needles clicked, a counterpoint to her thoughts. Finch's lantern, his sack, his letter, Lawrence's debts. These were not random. She recalled a theft in Much Benham, where a gardener had been blackmailed into stealing silver. His actions, orchestrated by a hidden hand. Was Finch a pawn or a player? And the gold? Where was it, if not with him? She opened her desk and added a postscript to her letter to Inspector Craddock, asking for inquiries into any London figures with crested seals, particularly those linked to gold or debt. The village whispers had given her much, but the truth, she knew, lay in the silence between them. In St. Mary Mead, secrets were never far, and Miss Marple, with her quiet patience, would find them. Chapter 5. The London Connection. The sun rose over St. Mary Mead on the 4th day since the theft at Grayson Manor, casting a frail light through the thinning mist of November 1928. Miss Jane Marple sat at her writing desk, her breakfast tray cleared, a fresh sheet of paper before her. The village's whispers had woven a rich tapestry, Robert Finch's lantern by the river, his heavy sack in the churchyard, the letter with its mysterious red seal. But the pattern remained elusive. The valet's absence, whether by choice or coercion, was the knot she must untie, and her thoughts turned to London, where Claraara Finch, his sister, might hold a thread to pull. Her letter to Inspector Dermot Craddock, dispatched the previous evening, sought answers about Clara and any whispers of gold in the city's underbelly. Now she awaited his reply, her knitting idle as her mind worked. The morning post brought a distraction. A note from Sir Henry Grayson, his handwriting jagged with impatience. "Miss Marple," it read, "your insights are valued, but time presses. The police are useless. Hargreaves thinks Finch is in France. I beg you, visit Finch's sister in London. She may know his plans. I'll cover expenses." Miss Marple's lips pursed, not at the offer of funds. She had her own modest means, but at Sir Henry's certainty of Finch's guilt. Certainty, she knew, was the enemy of truth, blinding one to subtler shades. Yet Clara was a lead worth pursuing, and London, with its labyrinth of secrets, might reveal what St. Mary Mead concealed. By noon, she was on the train to Paddington, her black hat pinned firmly, her umbrella resting across her lap. The countryside rolled past, fields patched with frost, and she recalled a journey to London years ago to unravel a theft of pearls in Mayfair. That case, like this, had hinged on a family tie, a sister who knew more than she said. Claraara Finch, Miss Marple mused, might be innocent, ignorant, or complicit, but her anxious face in the photograph suggested a woman burdened by worry. Arriving in Bloomsbury, Miss Marple navigated its narrow streets, where bookshops and boarding-houses jostled for space. Clara's address, a modest flat above a tailor's shop, was tucked between a cafe and a newsagent's, its windows curtained against the world. She climbed the creaking stairs and knocked, her knock precise but gentle, like a question posed. In church, the door opened to reveal Claraara Finch, a woman in her late 20s, her brown hair pinned haphazardly, her eyes red from sleeplessness or tears. She wore a plain grey dress, its hem frayed, and her hands twisted a handkerchief as she studied her visitor. "Miss Marple, Sir Henry wired to say you might come. Please, come in." The flat was small, its furniture worn but tidy, with a typewriter, on a deal table and a shelf of novels, Dickens, Bronte, a dog-eared copy of The Moonstone. A single photograph, a duplicate of the one in Finch's room, sat on the mantel, Robert's face stern beside Clara's softer one. Miss Marple settled in a wicker chair, her shawl draped over her knees, and observed Clara's nervous movements as she prepared tea. "I don't know where Robert is," Clara said, her voice trembling as she set down a chipped cup. "He'd never steal, Miss Marple. He's honest, always has been. The war changed him, made him quiet, but not a thief." Miss Marple's eyes, pale and steady, met Clara's. "I believe you believe that, Miss Finch. But men, even good ones, can be pressed by circumstance. Tell me about your brother, his life, his plans, his troubles." Clara sat, her hands still twisting the handkerchief. "Robert was in the trenches, a sergeant. Came back with medals, but no peace. He worked for Sir Henry because it was steady, and he wanted to save, for a garage, his own business. He wrote to me about it last month, said he was close to enough. Money, but it was risky. I thought he meant the market, stocks, you know. He never mentioned gold." Miss Marple sipped her tea, its bitterness a contrast to her mild tone. "Risky, you say? Did he speak of anyone troubling him? A debt, perhaps, or a threat?" Clara hesitated, her gaze flickering to the photograph. "He mentioned Sir Henry's nephew, Mr. Lawrence Grayson. Robert didn't like him, said he was always borrowing money, pestering Sir Henry. Once Robert caught him in the study near the safe, and Lawrence laughed it off. But Robert was uneasy. That was weeks ago." Miss Marple's fingers tightened slightly on her cup. Lawrence again, his shadow lengthening. "And your brother's letter, the one he sent express, the day before he vanished. May I see it?" Clara rose, retrieving a thin envelope from a drawer. The paper was plain. The postmark St. Mary Mead, the handwriting firm, but hurried. Miss Marple opened it, her eyes scanning the lines. "Dear Clara, I've a plan to secure our future, but it's risky. If it works, we'll have the garage by spring. Don't worry, but if anything happens, trust I did right. Your loving brother, Robert." No mention of gold, no hint of flight, but the word risky echoed like a warning bell. "This plan," Miss Marple said, folding the letter, "did he share more in person or in other letters?" Clara shook her head, tears welling. "No, he was always careful, even in letters, said less than he meant since the war. But he was hopeful, Miss Marple. He wouldn't steal. He wanted to earn his way." Miss Marple nodded, her mind on the red-sealed letter Elsie and Pye described. Did Robert receive a letter recently, perhaps from London, with a wax seal? Clara frowned, puzzled. "Not that I know. He never mentioned one. I write to him, but my letters are plain. Could it have been from Sir Henry?" "Perhaps," Miss Marple said, though she doubted it. Sir Henry's correspondence was formal, but not crested, and a valet was unlikely to receive such a missive. She glanced around the flat, noting its spareness. No gold, no luxury, only the quiet struggle of a typist's life. Clara's distress seemed genuine, but Miss Marple knew sincerity could mask half-truths. She recalled a case in St. Mary Mead, a sister who lied to protect a brother, her tears as real as her deception. "Thank you, Miss Finch," she said, rising. "If you hear from Robert or recall anything more, please write to me in St. Mary Mead. Small things matter." Clara nodded, clutching the handkerchief. "I will, Miss Marple. I just want him safe." As Miss Marple descended the stairs, the tailor below glanced up, his needle pausing. She smiled politely, her mind already elsewhere. Clara's flat held no gold, but it held fear, and fear was a clue as potent as any footprint. She hailed a cab to Scotland Yard, where Inspector Craddock, a young man with her nephew's energy but a policeman's caution awaited her in his cramped office, Miss Marple, he said, rising, his smile warm but professional. Your letter arrived this morning, and I've made inquiries. Claraara Finch is as she seems, a typist, no record, no wealth. Lives quietly, pays her rent on time. But London's black market is stirring. Rumours of gold ingots, though none match Sir Henry's lion's head stamp. They're likely smuggled, not stolen, but I've men watching the fences. Miss Marple settled in a chair, her umbrella propped against the desk. And any names, Dermot? A man with a crested seal, perhaps? Or dealings with valets? Craddock's brow furrowed. Nothing on a seal yet. Crests are common among the gentry, but I'll check stationery suppliers. As for names, there's a fence in Whitechapel one, Jimmy Kerr, known for handling gold. No link to Finch, but he's been flashing money lately. I'll have him tailed. Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. Thank you, Dermot. And one more thing. Sir Henry's nephew, Lawrence Grayson. He's in debt, I hear, and was at the manor before the theft. Might you look into his creditors? Craddock grinned, scribbling. A note. You don't miss much, do you? I'll dig into Grayson's finances. Debts make men desperate, and desperation makes thieves. They parted, Craddock promising a wire with any findings. Miss Marple returned to Paddington, the train's rhythm lulling her thoughts. Clara's letter, Lawrence's debts, the absent gold. Each was a thread, but the red-sealed letter was the needle, piercing the fabric of the case. She recalled a theft in Bath, where a coded letter had led a footman to steal, his actions driven by blackmail. Was Finch coerced, or had he planned something bolder? Back in St. Mary Mead by evening, she found a village alight with fresh gossip. Lily met her at the cottage door, her apron dusted with flour. Miss Marple, you're back! The vicar's wife saw something new. Mrs. Clement says she spotted Mr. Finch by the churchyard again, the night he vanished, not 2 nights before. Carrying that sack, she swears, and heading for the river. Miss Marple removed her hat, her mind sharpening. The night he vanished, Lily. That's new indeed. Did Mrs. Clement say more? Lily nodded, eager. She was closing the vicarage curtains near midnight. Saw him by the yews, moving fast, like he was late. The sack looked heavy, and he was alone. She didn't tell the vicar till today. What, with the bazaar? Miss Marple's knitting resumed, the needles clicking like a metronome. The churchyard again, the river again, but now at midnight. A time for secrecy, not routine. She recalled the boot prints by the crypt, the undisturbed lock. Finch's movements were deliberate, but to what end? Hiding gold or seeking it? And the red-sealed letter, had it spurred him to act? She visited Mrs. Clement the next morning, finding her in the vicarage garden, pruning roses with a distracted air. Jane, I feel such a fool, Mrs. Clement said, her shears pausing. I should have mentioned it sooner, but with the theft I forgot. It was midnight, the night Mr. Finch disappeared. I saw him from my window in the churchyard, carrying a sack. He looked not frightened, but urgent. He went toward the river path by the old oak. Miss Marple's umbrella tapped the gravel. Urgent, Margaret, and the sack. Did it seem the same as before? Mrs. Clement frowned. I think so, but it was dark. Heavy, certainly. His shoulders sagged. I thought he was burying something, but now I wonder if he was meeting someone. Miss Marple thanked her, her mind on the old oak, where Tom Baker had seen Finch with a lantern. A meeting, a burial, a search, the possibilities multiplied, each tied to the river's seclusion. She resolved to visit the churchyard again, but first she returned home, where a telegram from Craddock awaited. No trace of Finch in London. Kerr's movement suspicious, but no gold yet. Grayson's debts heavy, owes thousands to a Mayfair lender, one Victor Slade. Checking Slade's connections. More soon. Miss Marple sat by her fire, the telegram in hand. Victor Slade, a name that carried the weight of wealth and danger. Lawrence's debts, Finch's urgency, the missing gold. The threads were tightening, but the pattern was still veiled. She recalled a case in St. Mary Mead, a stolen brooch hidden in a riverbank, its thief caught by a single muddy boot. A river, she thought, held answers, and Finch's shadow, cast by an unseen light, would lead her there. She took up her knitting, the needles moving with quiet purpose. The London connection had given her much. Clara's fear, Lawrence's debts, Slade's shadow. But the red-sealed letter remained the key. In St. Mary Mead, where whispers grew like ivy, Miss Marple knew the truth was close, waiting for her patient hand to unravel it. Chapter 6. The Churchyard Clue. The 5th morning since the theft at Grayson Manor dawned crisp and clear, the last wisps of November fog burned away by a sun that hung low over St. Mary Mead. Miss Jane Marple stood at her cottage window, her breakfast, tray untouched save for a half-drunk cup of tea, her gaze fixed on the church spire, piercing the sky. The village was a cauldron of speculation, each rumour bubbling over the last, but her mind was anchored to the churchyard, its yews, its crypt, its boot prints in the mud. Robert Finch's midnight errand with a heavy sack, as reported by Mrs. Clement, was a beacon in the murk of the case, and the river path, winding from the old oak to secluded huts, whispered of secrets yet to be uncovered. Today, she resolved, the churchyard would speak. Her knitting lay idle, the pale blue shawl a soft heap in its basket, as she penned a note to Constable Hargreaves, requesting his presence at the churchyard that afternoon. Bring a spade, she wrote, her script precise, and a keen eye. Hargreaves, though earnest, was prone to seeing only the obvious. Finch as a fugitive, the gold spirited away. But Miss Marple knew the obvious was often a curtain drawn over truth. The boot prints, the undisturbed crypt, the sack's weight. These were not the marks of a man fleeing, but of one bound to a purpose, perhaps not his own. By mid-morning, she donned her black coat and hat, her umbrella a familiar weight in her hand, and set out for the church. The village was stirring, its lanes busy with the clink of milk bottles and the chatter of shopkeepers. At the bakery, Mrs. Price leaned over her counter, proclaiming Finch's escape to a smuggler's ship, while at the newsagent's, Miss Hartnell declared the theft a judgment on Sir Henry's greed. Miss Marple passed with a nod, her ears attuned to the village's pulse, but her thoughts on the churchyard's silence. The church of St. Mary the Virgin stood at the village's edge, its Norman stones weathered by centuries, its tower casting a long shadow across the graves. The churchyard was a patchwork of mossy stones and tangled grass, bounded by yews whose dark branches seemed to guard the dead. Miss Marple entered through the lych gate, her steps slow but deliberate, her eyes scanning the ground. She recalled Mrs. Clement's account, Finch at midnight, sack in hand, moving toward the river, and Mr. Timms's earlier sighting, 2 nights before, near the old crypt. The crypt, a crumbling relic of a forgotten gentry, was her first destination. She found it tucked in a corner of the churchyard, its stone door half hidden by ivy, its padlock rusted but intact. The boot prints she had noted before were fainter now, softened by yesterday's sun, but still visible. Deep, broad, the marks of a man bearing weight. They led from the crypt towards the river path, where the ground hardened and the trail vanished. Miss Marple knelt, her gloved fingers brushing the earth. The soil near the crypt was undisturbed, no signs of digging, but a few paces away, beneath a yew's gnarled roots, she spotted a patch of earth that seemed fresher, its surface slightly raised as if turned and tamped down. She straightened, her umbrella tapping the ground. The yew's roots, thick and twisted, formed a natural hollow, a place to conceal something small or heavy. She recalled a case in St. Mary Mead, a stolen locket buried under a rose bush, its thief betrayed by a single clod of earth. The churchyard, she sensed, held a clue, but its nature, gold, a decoy, or something else, remained veiled. Constable Hargreaves arrived at 2 o'clock, his lanky frame dwarfed by a spade and a sceptical expression. "Afternoon, Miss Marple," he said, tipping his helmet. "Got your note. You reckon Finch buried something here. Seems a long shot. Gold's heavy, and he'd need time to dig deep." Miss Marple's lips curved faintly, her eyes bright, with purpose. "Time, Constable, is relative, and a clever man needs only enough to deceive. Those boot prints suggest weight, and Mrs. Clement's sighting places Mr. Finch here at midnight, the night he vanished. Let us see what the yew tree hides." Hargreaves, though dubious, followed her to the yew, where the disturbed soil lay like a subtle scar. He set to work, his spade biting into the earth with a soft thud. The village was quiet, save for the blackbird's trill and the distant bleat of sheep, and Miss Marple stood back, her umbrella a silent sentinel. The first few inches yielded only roots and pebbles, but at a foot's depth, Hargreaves' spade struck something solid. A coarse sack, its burlap stained with mud. "Blimey," Hargreaves muttered, kneeling to pull it free. The sack was heavy, its contents shifting with a metallic clink. He opened it, revealing 2 gold ingots, their surfaces gleaming with the lion's head stamp of Sir Henry's assayer. The constable's eyes widened, his scepticism forgotten. "It's the gold, ma'am. Finch hid it, just as I thought." Miss Marple stepped closer, her gaze fixed on the ingots. They were pristine, their edges sharp, but the sack was new, its stitching unfrayed, a detail that jarred her. "2 ingots, Constable," she said softly. "Sir Henry lost 10. Why bury only 2, and so shallowly? A thief planning to return would dig deeper, or take all." Hargreaves scratched his head, the spade forgotten. "Maybe he panicked, ma'am, hid these and ran with the rest." "Or," Miss Marple said, her voice as gentle as a breeze, "someone wishes us to think. So, this sack is too clean for a midnight burial, and the soil too lightly packed. It feels arranged." She knelt, her fingers tracing the sack's edge. No initials, no marks, but its newness suggested purchase, not haste. She recalled a theft in Chipping Cleghorn, where a stolen watch was planted in a garden to implicate a maid. This, she sensed, was a decoy, but whose hand had placed it? Hargreaves, eager for action, bagged the ingots and scribbled notes. "I'll tell Sir Henry, ma'am. This proves Finch is our man. Hid these, then scarpered with the rest. Maybe he's holed up nearby, waiting." Miss Marple's eyes lingered on the yew, its roots like fingers clutching a secret. Nearby, perhaps, but not as a thief, I think. Mr. Finch's actions, his lantern by the river, his letter to Clara, his midnight errand, suggest a man driven, not fleeing. We must look to the river path, Constable, and to those who knew of the gold. Hargreaves frowned, his notebook trembling. "You mean Sir Henry's nephew, Mr. Lawrence? The groom said they argued, but he's family. Wouldn't steal from his own uncle." "Family," Miss Marple said, her tone mild but pointed, "can be the closest danger. Mr. Lawrence's debts are heavy, and debts make men bold. But let us not rush to judgment. The river may tell us more." They followed the path from the churchyard, a narrow trail flanked by reeds and willows, its mud scored with faint tracks. The old oak, where Tom Baker had seen Finch with a lantern, stood sentinel at a bend, its roots sprawling toward the water. Miss Marple paused, her eyes scanning the ground. No fresh prints, no disturbed earth. But the grass near the oak was flattened, as if someone had stood there watching or waiting. She recalled Clara's letter, a risky plan, and the red-sealed missive that had troubled Finch. Had he come here to hide, to seek, or to meet? The path led to a cluster of fishing huts, their timbers weathered, their doors padlocked against trespassers. Hargreaves checked each, finding only dust and cobwebs. "Nothing here, ma'am," he said, his voice tinged with disappointment. "If Finch came this way, he left no trace." Miss Marple's umbrella tapped the ground, her gaze on the river, its surface rippling in the sunlight. "Traces, Constable, are not always visible. A man with a sack at midnight does not wander aimlessly. He had a purpose, perhaps to hide, perhaps to mislead. We must consider who benefits from these 2 ingots being found." Hargreaves blinked, his mind struggling to keep pace. "You think someone else buried them? To frame Finch?" "Frame," Miss Marple said, "is a strong word, but not inaccurate. The gold is a lure, drawing our eyes to Finch while the true thief moves unseen. We must ask, who knew the safe's combination, and who knew Finch's habits? They returned to the churchyard, where Hargreaves secured the ingots in his satchel, his excitement tempered by Miss Marple's caution. The village, alerted by a passing boy who'd seen the digging, was abuzz by evening, the Blue Boar Inn humming with theories. Elsie, the barmaid, greeted Miss Marple with wide eyes. "2 ingots, Miss Marple. They're saying Finch buried them to come back later, but you found them first." Miss Marple settled at her usual table, her tea steaming. "Found, Elsie, but not by chance. Tell me, has anyone spoken of Mr. Lawrence Grayson lately? His visits to the manor, perhaps?" Elsie leaned in, her voice low. "Not much, ma'am, but the groom was in yesterday. Said Lawrence was at the manor the day before the theft, arguing with Sir Henry about money. Left in a huff he did, and passed Finch by the stables. Didn't look friendly, the groom said." Miss Marple nodded, her mind on Lawrence's debts and Victor Slade, the Mayfair lender Craddock was investigating. She recalled a case in Danemouth, where a nephew had stolen heirlooms to settle gambling debts. His charm, a mask for desperation. Lawrence's presence, his tension with Finch, was a thread growing taut. As she left the inn, Mrs. Bantry hailed her from across the street, her fur coat gleaming. "Jane, you're a marvel. 2 ingots found, and all because of you. But where's the rest? Finch must have a hideout. Maybe a cave, like in a story." Miss Marple smiled, her eyes twinkling. "Caves, Dolly, are for pirates, not valets. The rest of the gold is close, I think, but not where we expect. Patience will show us." At her cottage she lit a fire and sat by the hearth. Her knitting resumed. The needles clicked, a counterpoint to her thoughts. The churchyard clue had revealed much. 2 ingots, a new sack, a staged burial. But it had raised more questions. Why only 2? Why so shallow? And the river path, with its flattened grass and empty huts, held a secret she could not yet grasp. She thought of Finch's letter to Clara, its promise of a risky plan, and the red-sealed missive that had set him in motion. Was he a victim, a pawn, or something else? She opened her desk and added a note to Craddock. "Urgent. Check Slade's associates for any link to St. Mary Mead or Grayson Manor. The gold is here, I believe, but its keeper is not Finch." The churchyard had spoken, but its message was incomplete. In St. Mary Mead, where shadows danced with light, Miss Marple knew the truth was near, waiting for her quiet hand to draw it forth. Chapter 7. The Sisters' Secret. The 6th day since the theft at Grayson Manor broke with a sky of unbroken grey, the air heavy with the promise of rain over St. Mary Mead. Miss Jane Marple sat in her parlour, a fire crackling in the hearth, her breakfast tray bearing only a pot of tea and a single scone, her appetite dimmed by the weight of the case. The discovery of 2 gold ingots in the churchyard, buried shallowly in a pristine sack, had electrified the village, but to her it was a feint, a carefully placed lure to pin the crime on Robert Finch, the valet's midnight errand, his lantern, by the river, the red-sealed letter that had troubled him. These were threads of a tapestry whose pattern was still obscured. Claraara Finch, his sister, had offered sincerity in London, but Miss Marple knew sincerity could be a mask, and Clara's anxious eyes held a story yet untold. Today she would return to Bloomsbury, armed with new questions and a quiet resolve to uncover the sisters' secret. Her knitting lay untouched, the pale blue shawl a soft heap in its basket, as she reviewed her notes, scribbled in a small precise hand on the fly-leaf of an old prayer book, the boot prints by the crypt, the flattened grass by the old oak, Lawrence Grayson's debts to Victor Slade, the red-sealed letter with its crest. These were not random. Finch's letter to Clara, with its talk of a risky plan, suggested a man on the edge of a precipice, but whether he had jumped or been pushed remained unclear. She penned a wire to Inspector Craddock, asking for any updates on Slade's associates or gold in London's black market, then prepared for the train, her black coat and hat as much a uniform as Hargreaves's badge. By 11, she was rattling toward Paddington, the countryside a blur of frost-tipped hedgerows and skeletal trees. The train's rhythm steadied her thoughts, and she recalled a case in St. Mary Mead, where a sister had hidden her brother's theft to shield him from ruin. Clara's flat, with its sparse furnishings and anxious air, had revealed no gold, but her hesitation when speaking of Lawrence Grayson had struck a chord. Miss Marple's fingers tightened on her umbrella. Hesitation, like silence, was a clue, and she would probe it gently, like a gardener testing soil. In Bloomsbury, the streets were alive with the clatter of typewriters and the shouts of newsboys, the city's pulse a stark contrast to St. Mary Mead's murmur. Clara's flat, above the tailor's shop, seemed smaller in the daylight, its curtains drawn against the grey sky. Miss Marple knocked, her knock a soft insistence, and Clara opened the door, her face paler than before, her eyes shadowed by sleeplessness. She wore the same grey dress, its frayed hem a testament to her frugal life, and her hands clutched a crumpled letter not yet posted. "Miss Marple," Clara said, her voice brittle, "I didn't expect you again. Have you news of Robert?" Miss Marple stepped inside, her umbrella propped against the wall. "Not yet, Miss Finch, but I am closer, I think. May I sit? There are matters we must discuss. Small things, but important." Clara nodded, gesturing to the wicker chair, and busied herself with the kettle, her movements jerky. The flat was unchanged. The typewriter, the novels, the photograph of Robert. But a new tension hung in the air, like the scent of rain before a storm. Miss Marple settled, her shawl draped over her knees, her eyes noting the letter in Clara's hand, its envelope plain, but addressed in a trembling script. "You're writing to someone," Miss Marple said, her tone as mild as milk. "To Robert, perhaps, in case he reaches you?" Clara flinched, the kettle rattling. "No, it's to a friend, nothing important." She set down a cup, the tea weak and tepid, and sat, her hands folding the letter out of sight. Miss Marple sipped, her gaze steady. "Friends are a comfort in troubled times. But let us speak of Robert. In London, you mentioned his plan for a garage, his unease with Mr. Lawrence Grayson. I've since learned of a letter he received days before he vanished. A letter with a red wax seal bearing a crest. Did he ever speak of such a letter, or of anyone in London who might send it?" Clara's eyes darted to the photograph, then back. "A red seal? No, he never mentioned it. My letters to him were plain, and he didn't speak of others. Could it have been from Sir Henry?" "Unlikely," Miss Marple said, her voice gentle but firm. "Sir Henry's letters are formal, not crested, and a valet is rarely so addressed. This letter troubled Robert, I'm told, and he posted a reply to you the next day, express. Your brother was a careful man, Miss Finch. What made him so urgent?" Clara's hands twisted, the letter crackling. "I don't know, Miss Marple. His letter to me, the one you saw, spoke of a plan, but he was vague. He always was since the war. Said it was for our future, but risky. I thought he meant investments or a loan. He wouldn't steal, I swear it." Miss Marple's eyes softened, but her mind was a blade, cutting through Clara's words. "I believe you love your brother, Miss Finch, but love can blind us to truths. 2 of Sir Henry's ingots were found yesterday, buried in the churchyard, in a sack too new for a thief's haste. Robert was seen there at midnight, the night he vanished. If he did not steal, what was he doing? And who knew of his habits, his access to the safe?" Clara's face crumpled, tears spilling. "I don't know. Robert was good, but he was guarded. After the war, he trusted few. He wrote of Lawrence Grayson, yes, said he was trouble, always in debt, always charming Sir Henry for money. Robert caught him near the safe once, weeks ago, and Lawrence laughed. But Robert didn't trust him. That's all I know. Miss Marple leaned forward, her voice a quiet probe. And this letter in your hand, Miss Finch, is it truly to a friend, or to someone who might know more? Small secrets left untold can hide great truths. Clara froze, the letter slipping to her lap. She stared at it, then at Miss Marple, her resolve cracking like thin ice. It's to Mr. Slade, she whispered. Victor Slade, in Mayfair. Robert mentioned him once, in a letter I didn't show you. Said Slade was pressing Lawrence, that Lawrence owed him thousands. Robert was afraid, not for himself, but for what Lawrence might do. I thought, if I wrote to Slade, asked him to leave Robert alone, it might help. Miss Marple's heart quickened, though her face remained serene. Victor Slade, the lender Craddock was investigating, now linked directly to Finch. Afraid of what Lawrence might do, she repeated softly. Did Robert say more about Slade, or Lawrence's debts? Clara shook her head, tears falling. Only that Slade was dangerous, not the sort to forgive debts. Robert said he'd seen Lawrence with a man in St. Mary Mead, a stranger with a beige scar, the day before he wrote. Robert thought he was Slade's man, watching him. That's why I wrote. I thought Slade might know where Robert is. Miss Marple's fingers tightened on her cup, her mind racing. A scarred man, a stranger in the village, tied to Slade and Lawrence. She recalled Elsie's tale at the Blue Boar, of Lawrence meeting a scarred man, speaking of deals. The threads were converging. Lawrence's debts, Slade's pressure, Finch's fear, the staged burial. But the red-sealed letter, the catalyst, remained elusive. Miss Finch, she said, her tone gentle but insistent. You must show me this letter from Robert, the one mentioning Slade. And you must not send to Slade. Not yet. He is a man of shadows, and shadows can harm. Clara hesitated, then rose, retrieving a second envelope from the typewriter's drawer. The paper was creased, the handwriting tighter than the express letter, as if written under strain. Miss Marple read, Dear Clara, I'm close to the garage, but trouble follows. Lawrence owes a man named Slade thousands he can't pay. Slade's man was here today, scarred face, watching me. Lawrence is desperate, and I fear what he'll do. If I act, it's for us. Don't write back yet. Robert. The postmark was a week before the theft. The tone urgent but controlled. Miss Marple folded the letter, her mind a kaleidoscope of clues. Thank you, Clara. This helps more than you know. Robert was protecting you, I think, but he saw too much. Keep this safe, and tell no one, not even Sir Henry. Clara nodded, her tears drying. I just want him back, Miss Marple. If he's alive, I'll do anything. Miss Marple rose, her umbrella in hand. He may be closer than we think, Miss Finch. Courage, now. She left the flat, the tailor below glancing up as she passed, his needle a flicker in the dim shop. The city pressed around her, its noise a stark contrast to St. Mary Mead's quiet. But her thoughts were clear. Slade's man, the scarred stranger, was a key, and Lawrence Grayson, with his charm and debts, was the lock. She hailed a cab to Scotland Yard, where Inspector Craddock awaited, his office a clutter of files and cigarette ash. "Miss Marple," he said, rising, "your wire came this morning. Slade's a shark, lends to the gentry, but his methods are dirty. No link to St. Mary Mead yet, but his associate, Jimmy Kerr, the Whitechapel fence, was seen with a scarred man. One Tommy Walsh. Walsh is Slade's muscle, sent to collect debts. No gold surfaced, but Kerr's spending freely." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. "Tommy Walsh, you say? And Lawrence Grayson's debts?" "Over £5,000 to Slade," Craddock said, consulting a note. "Grayson's been dodging, payments promising assets he doesn't have. Slade's impatient, sent Walsh to press him, likely last week. If Grayson's tied to the theft, he's playing a dangerous game." Miss Marple nodded, her mind on the scarred man in St. Mary Mead. "Dangerous indeed, Dermot. Robert Finch saw Walsh, feared Lawrence's desperation. The 2 ingots in the churchyard are a distraction, I believe, to blame Finch, while the rest of the gold waits, check Walsh's movements, and Kerr's warehouse. Gold is heavy, and heavy things leave traces." Craddock grinned, scribbling. "You're a wonder, Miss Marple. I'll wire if we find anything. Safe travels back." The train to St. Mary Mead was quieter, the evening sky bruising with rain. Miss Marple sat by the window, her umbrella across, her lap, her thoughts weaving. Clara's secret, her brother's fear of Slade and Walsh, had illuminated the case. Finch had not stolen, but he had known too much, seen too much. The red-sealed letter, perhaps from Slade or Walsh, had spurred him to act, perhaps to confront Lawrence, perhaps to protect Clara. The churchyard burial, the river path, the missing 8 ingots, all pointed to a scheme larger than one man's. Greed. Back in her cottage, Lily greeted her with a tray of soup and news. "Miss Marple, the village is wild. They say the 2 ingots prove Finch's guilt, but Sir Henry's raging, wants the rest found. And the groom at the manor says Lawrence was back yesterday, asking about the churchyard, all nervous-like." Miss Marple's needles resumed their click-a-steady pulse. "Nervous, Lily? How interesting! Mr. Lawrence is a man under pressure, and pressure makes mistakes." She sipped her soup, her mind on the scarred man, the river, the gold. The sister's secret had opened a door, but the room beyond was dark. In St. Mary Mead, where truths hid in plain sight, Miss Marple knew she was close, her quiet hand poised to lift the veil. Chapter 8. The Nephew's Game. The 7th day since the theft at Grayson Manor ushered in a drizzle that cloaked St. Mary Mead in a mournful veil, the rain pattering softly on the thatched roofs and cobblestones of the village. Miss Jane Marple sat by her parlour fire, a shawl draped over her shoulders, her breakfast tray bearing a pot of tea and a slice of buttered toast, though her appetite was eclipsed by the puzzle before her, the discovery of 2 gold ingots in the churchyard, Claraara Finch's revelation of her brother's fear of Victor Slade, and his scarred associate Tommy Walsh, and the looming shadow of Lawrence Grayson's debts, had tightened the threads of the case. Yet the red-sealed letter, the catalyst for Robert Finch's actions, remained a phantom, and the 8 missing ingots a silent taunt. Today Miss Marple resolved to draw Lawrence Grayson into the open, for his charm and desperation, she sensed, were the pivot on which the theft turned. Her knitting needles, usually a steady companion, lay still in their basket, the pale blue, shawl untouched as she reviewed her notes, scribbled in the margins of an old gardening manual, the boot prints by the crypt, the flattened grass by the old oak. Clara's letter from Robert mentioning Slade's pressure on Lawrence, and the staged burial of 2 ingots. All pointed to a scheme orchestrated not by Finch, but by someone who knew his habits and access to the safe. Lawrence, with his debts to Slade and his tense encounter with Finch, was no mere bystander. Miss Marple recalled a case in St. Mary Mead, where a charming nephew had pilfered a widow's savings, his smile a mask for calculation. Lawrence, she thought, was playing a game, and she would test its rules. By mid-morning, the rain had softened to a mist, and Miss Marple, clad in her black coat and felt hat, set out for the village post office to send a wire to Inspector Craddock, requesting any updates on Tommy Walsh's movements or Jimmy Kerr's warehouse. Her umbrella tapped the cobbles, a rhythmic counterpoint to her thoughts. The village was subdued, its gossip tempered by the weather, but the Blue Boar Inn, she knew, would be alive with talk of the churchyard find. She paused at the newsagent's, where Miss Hartnell, peering over her spectacles, hailed her. "Miss Marple, you're a marvel!" Miss Hartnell exclaimed, her voice sharp with excitement. "2 ingots found, and all because of you. But the village says Finch is still out there, hiding the rest. What do you make of it?" Miss Marple's smile was faint, her eyes bright with purpose. "The village, Miss Hartnell, sees what is loudest, but truth is often quiet. Mr. Finch's role is not what it seems, I think. Tell me, have you heard of Mr. Lawrence Grayson's recent visits to the manor?" Miss Hartnell's lips pursed, her pince-nez glinting. "Oh, that one! Mrs. Price says he was at the manor 2 days ago, asking Sir Henry for money again. Left. In a temper, she heard, and was seen by the churchyard, looking shifty. A wastrel, if you ask me, but Sir Henry dotes on him." Miss Marple nodded, filing the detail alongside Lily's report of Lawrence's nervous inquiries about the churchyard. Shiftiness, like innocence, can be misread. Thank you, Miss Hartnell. She moved on, her mind on Lawrence's movements. His presence at the manor, his interest in the churchyard, suggested a man anxious to control the narrative, or to cover his tracks. At the post office, Mr. Pye, polishing his counter, greeted her with a knowing nod. "Another wire to London, Miss Marple. You're turning this theft into a regular detective novel. The village can't stop about those ingots. Say Finch buried them to fetch later, but you found them first." Miss Marple handed him the wire, her voice mild. "Novels, Mr. Pye, thrive on twists, and life is much the same. Did Mr. Lawrence Grayson post anything recently, or receive any letters? His visits to the manor seem frequent." Pye adjusted his spectacles, relishing the question. "Lawrence, eh? He posted a letter yesterday to a Mr. Victor Slade in Mayfair. Express costly for a man with no money. Looked nervy, kept glancing out at the window, like he expected someone. No letters received, though. Not here, at least." Miss Marple's heart quickened, though her face betrayed nothing. A letter to Slade, the lender pressing Lawrence's debts, confirmed Clara's account of danger. "Nervy, you say? And his manner? Did he speak of the theft, or Mr. Finch?" "Not a word," Pye said, leaning forward. "But he asked if anyone had been snooping about the churchyard. Said it casually, but his eyes were sharp. I told him only you and Hargreaves, and he laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound." Miss Marple thanked him, her mind racing. Lawrence's letter to Slade, his questions about the churchyard, were not the actions of an innocent heir. She recalled Elsie's tale of Lawrence meeting a scarred man, likely Tommy Walsh, speaking of deals. The nephew's game was growing clearer, but its stakes were high, and Finch, alive or dead, was its pawn. Her next step was to confront Lawrence directly, but subtly, as a spider tests its web. She sent a note to Grayson Manor, inviting him to tea at her cottage that afternoon, phrasing it as a neighbourly gesture to discuss the village's excitement. "Your uncle values your perspective," she wrote, knowing flattery would draw him. By 2 o'clock she was home, the parlour tidy, a tray of scones and a fresh pot of tea prepared by Lily, who hovered with barely contained curiosity. "Mr. Lawrence, coming here," Lily said, her apron twisted in her hands. "The village says he's up to no good, Miss Marple." The groom told Elsie he saw Lawrence by the manor's stables last night, checking a car. Sir Henry's old Daimler, not his own, looked like he was hiding something. Miss Marple's needles, resumed at last, clicked softly. "Hiding, Lily? That's a word worth noting. Mr. Lawrence is a man of many faces, I think. We shall see which he wears today." Lawrence arrived, promptly at 3, his tailored suit a touch too new for a man in debt, his smile as polished as the manor's silver. At 35, he was handsome, with dark hair and a gambler's easy grace, but his eyes, restless and shadowed, betrayed unease. He settled in the parlour's best chair, accepting tea with a charm that felt rehearsed. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice warm, "this is a delight. The village is agog with your sleuthing. 2 ingots found. Poor Uncle Henry is beside himself, but you've given him hope. What's your secret?" Miss Marple's smile was disarming, her eyes sharp as she poured. "No secret, Mr. Grayson, only observation. The churchyard was kind enough to reveal a clue, but it raises questions. Only 2 ingots when 10 were stolen, and Mr. Finch so conveniently absent. What do you make of it?" Lawrence's smile faltered, his fingers tightening on the cup. Finch, of course. He had the combination, the key, the chance. Probably buried those 2 to collect later, then fled with the rest. A clever valet, but not clever enough, missy. Marple's needles paused, her gaze steady. Clever, perhaps, but gold is heavy, Mr. Grayson. 10 kilograms would slow a man, and Mr. Finch was seen with a sack, not a cart. You were at the manor the day before the theft, I believe. Did you notice anything amiss with him?" Lawrence laughed, a touch too loud. "Finch? He was his usual self, silent, stiff, like a soldier on parade. I barely spoke to him. I was there to see Uncle about investments. Dull stuff, I'm afraid." Miss Marple sipped her tea, her voice gentle. "Investments, yes. And yet, I hear you've had troubles, debts perhaps, to a Mr. Victor Slade in Mayfair. Such pressures can weigh heavily, can they not?" Lawrence's face froze, his charm cracking like porcelain. "Debts? Village gossip, Miss Marple. I get by. Uncle's generous, and I manage. Slade's a nobody, a rumour." He set down his cup, his hand trembling slightly. Miss Marple's eyes softened, but her mind was a trap, closing gently. Rumours, like clues, often hold truth. Mr. Finch wrote to his sister of your debts, and of a scarred man, Slade's associate perhaps, seen in St. Mary Mead. You met such a man, I'm told, At the Blue Boar, speaking of deals. Small things, Mr. Grayson, but they add up. Lawrence stood, his smile gone, his voice sharp. You're meddling, Miss Marple. Finch is your thief, not me. He took the gold, buried some, and ran. I've no part in it. He grabbed his hat, his exit swift, but not swift enough to hide the fear in his eyes. Miss Marple watched him go, her needles resuming their dance. Lawrence's denial was a confession of sorts, his panic a sign of guilt, or exposure. She recalled a case in Much Benham, where a nephew's debts had led to theft, his lies unravelling under quiet pressure. Lawrence, she thought, was unravelling too, but the gold and Finch remained hidden. That evening, she visited the Blue Boar, where Elsie, wiping glasses, shared fresh gossip. Mr. Lawrence was here an hour ago, Miss Marple, drinking brandy, looking like he'd seen a ghost, asked about you, said you were stirring trouble, then he left fast, toward the manor. Miss Marple nodded, her mind on the Daimler Lily mentioned. Trouble, Elsie. I only seek truth. Did he speak of anyone else? A scarred man, perhaps? Or Mr. Finch? Elsie leaned in, her voice low. Not Finch, but he muttered about a deal going wrong, and someone named Walsh. Said he needed to fix it quick. Didn't sound happy. Miss Marple thanked her, her thoughts on Tommy Walsh. Slade's muscle. She returned home, where a telegram from Craddock awaited. Walsh spotted in St. Mary Mead last week, meeting Grayson. Kerr's warehouse searched. No gold, but receipts for new burlap sacks, like your churchyard find. Slade pressing Grayson. Hard. Be cautious! Miss Marple sat by the fire, the telegram in hand. The nephew's game was desperate. Stealing the gold to pay Slade, burying 2 ingots to frame Finch, meeting Walsh to arrange a sale. But Finch's role, victim or ally, remained unclear, and the red-sealed letter, perhaps from Slade or Walsh, was the missing piece. She recalled a theft in Danemouth, where a coded letter had driven a servant to act, his loyalty twisted by fear. Was Finch alive, hidden, or silenced? She penned a note to Hargreaves, suggesting a watch on Lawrence's movements, particularly the Daimler. The rain fell harder, drumming on the roof, but Miss Marple's mind was clear. Lawrence Grayson's game was faltering, and in St. Mary Mead, where truths bloomed like weeds, she would force his hand. Chapter 9. The Trap. The 8th day since the theft at Grayson Manor dawned with a restless wind that swept through St. Mary Mead, rattling windows and stirring the fallen leaves into restless eddies. Miss Jane Marple stood at her cottage door, her shawl drawn tight against the November chill, her eyes tracing the path to the church spire, a steadfast beacon in the village's turmoil. The discovery of 2 gold ingots in the churchyard, Claraara Finch's revelation of her brother's fear of Victor Slade's scarred enforcer, Tommy Walsh, and Lawrence Grayson's unravelling composure had brought the case to a precipice. Yet the 8 missing ingots, Robert Finch's true fate, and the elusive red-sealed letter remained shrouded in shadow. Lawrence, with his debts and desperate charm, was the fulcrum, and Miss Marple, with the patience of a gardener tending thorns, resolved to set a trap to expose his hand. Her breakfast tray, bearing only a pot of tea and a single biscuit, sat untouched as she sat at her writing desk. Her notes, etched in a delicate hand on the end papers of an old hymn book, spread before her. The flattened grass by the old oak, the new burlap sack in the churchyard, Lawrence's letter to Slade, and his meeting with Walsh at the Blue Boar formed a pattern. But it was incomplete. Finch's midnight errand, his lantern by the river, and his letter to Clara about a risky plan suggested a man caught in a web, not spinning one. Miss Marple recalled a case in St. Mary Mead, where a trap, a whispered rumour of a lost brooch, had flushed out a thief. Today she would weave a similar snare, using the gold's allure to draw the true culprit into the light. She penned a note to Constable Hargreaves, her words measured but urgent. "Meet me at Grayson Manor at noon. I propose a plan to recover the remaining ingots, but it requires Sir Henry's consent and your discretion. Bring your notebook and a man you trust." Her knitting needles, silent in their basket, seemed to wait, as if sensing the day's tension. She donned her black coat and felt hat, her umbrella a steady companion, and set out for the manor, the wind tugging at her skirts. The village was subdued, its gossip dampened by the weather, but eyes followed her from shop windows and garden gates. At the bakery, Mrs. Price leaned out, her voice carrying over the wind. "Miss Marple, any news of the gold? They say Finch is in hiding, waiting to strike again." Miss Marple's smile was faint, her eyes sharp. "The village, Mrs. Price, loves a villain, but villains are often closer than we think. Patience will show us." She moved on, her mind on Lawrence's nervous inquiries about the churchyard and his muttered fears of a deal gone wrong. The nephew's game, she sensed, was nearing its end, and her trap would hasten it. At Grayson Manor, Sir Henry received her in the drawing-room, its velvet curtains drawn against the wind, its air thick with the scent of his cigar. His face, still florid, was etched with exhaustion, his bluster tempered by the churchyard find. Constable Hargreaves stood by the fireplace, his notebook clutched like a talisman, joined by a burly sergeant, Tompkins, whose presence suggested Hargreaves' growing unease. "Miss Marple," Sir Henry said, rising, "you've worked wonders. 2 ingots found, but 8 remain, and Finch is still at large. What's this plan of yours? I want my gold back, and that traitor in chains." Miss Marple settled in a high-backed chair, her umbrella propped beside her, her voice as gentle as a lullaby. "A plan, Sir Henry, to catch a thief, but it requires care. The 2 ingots in the churchyard were a decoy, I believe, placed to implicate Mr. Finch, while the true culprit moved the rest. We must lure that culprit out with a rumour of another find." Hargreaves' brow furrowed, his pencil hovering. "A rumour, ma'am? You mean lie about more gold?" "Not a lie, Constable," Miss Marple said, her eyes twinkling, "but a suggestion. Let it be known, discreetly, that a 3rd ingot was found this morning, buried near the manor's old well by the orchard. The well is secluded, easily watched. If the thief believes we're closing in, he may act, to retrieve the gold, or to ensure it stays hidden. We must watch and wait." Sir Henry's moustache quivered, his voice a growl. "Clever, Miss Marple, but risky. If Finch hears, he'll bolt, or worse, come armed. And who'll spread this rumour? The village can't keep a secret." Miss Marple's lips curved, a shadow of amusement. "The village, Sir Henry, is our ally. Tell your staff, Elsie, the groom, the cook, that a 3rd ingot was found, but swear them to silence. By evening, the Blue Boar will hum with it. The thief, if he is near, will hear and act. Constable, you and Sergeant Tompkins must watch the well tonight, hidden but ready." Hargreaves scribbled, his scepticism fading. "And if it's not Finch, ma'am, you've been hinting at someone else. Mr. Lawrence, maybe?" Miss Marple's gaze was steady, her voice soft. "I hint at nothing, Constable, but I observe. Mr. Lawrence's debts are heavy, his movements curious. He was seen by the churchyard, asking questions, and met a man, scarred, dangerous, in the village. Let us see if the well draws him out, dear." Henry's eyes widened, his cigar forgotten. "Lawrence, my own nephew? Preposterous. He's a fool with money, but no thief. Finch had the combination, the key. Lawrence barely knows the safe exists." Miss Marple's needles, produced from her bag, began their quiet dance. "Knowledge, Sir Henry, is often assumed. Mr. Finch was discreet, but a nephew in the house might overhear or charm. Let us test the waters and see who swims." The plan was set. Sir Henry, reluctant but persuaded, instructed his staff, his voice booming with mock secrecy. By afternoon, Miss Marple visited the Blue Boar, where Elsie, polishing glasses, greeted her with a conspiratorial whisper. "Miss Marple, it's all over the village. A third ingot by the Manor's well. The cook told the butcher, and he told me. Is it true?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, her voice low. "Truth, Elsie, is a slippery thing. But keep your ears open. Someone may speak of the well or the gold. Small words carry weight." Elsie nodded, her apron twisted in excitement. "I will, ma'am. Oh, and Mr. Lawrence was here at noon, drinking fast. Heard him say to the barman he's staying at the Manor tonight, to sort things out. Looked like he hadn't slept." Miss Marple thanked her, her mind on Lawrence's haste. She recalled a case in Chipping Cleghorn, where a rumour of a hidden will had drawn a thief to a garden shed, his guilt revealed by a single step. The well, secluded by apple trees, was a perfect stage, and Lawrence, she sensed, was its lead actor. Dusk. The village was alight with the rumour, the Blue Boar's taproom buzzing with theories, Finch returning for the gold, a smuggler's plot, even ghosts guarding the well. Miss Marple, back at her cottage, sat by the fire, her knitting steady as she waited for Hargreaves's report. Lily, bringing a tray of soup, chattered nervously. "Miss Marple, the whole village is watching that well. The groom says Lawrence was at the Manor all day, pacing, asking about the ingots. Do you think he'll go there?" Miss Marple's needles clicked, a metronome to her thoughts. "Pacing, Lily? A man who paces is a man with a burden. We shall see if he unloads it tonight." At 10 o'clock, Hargreaves and Tompkins, cloaked in dark coats, took position in the orchard, hidden by the gnarled trees that ringed the well. The night was still, the wind hushed, the stars veiled by clouds. Miss Marple, though urged to stay home, insisted on joining them, her black coat blending with the shadows, her umbrella a silent prop. She crouched behind a tree, her eyes fixed on the well's stone rim, its bucket swaying faintly in the breeze. Midnight passed, the village silent save for an owl's cry. Then a rustle, soft, deliberate, came from the path. A figure emerged, tall and lean, a shovel in hand, his movements furtive but purposeful. Miss Marple's breath caught as the moonlight revealed Lawrence Grayson, his face pale, his eyes darting. He approached the well, glancing over his shoulder, then knelt, his shovel probing the earth. Hargreaves signalled Tompkins, and they stepped forward, their lanterns flaring. "Mr. Grayson!" Hargreaves barked. "Step back, sir, and drop the shovel!" Lawrence froze, his shovel clattering to the ground, his voice a mix of panic and defiance. "What's this? I was curious, that's all. Heard about the ingot, thought I'd check. No harm in it." Miss Marple emerged, her figure small but commanding in the lantern light. "Curiosity, Mr. Grayson, is a thin excuse for a man with a shovel at midnight. You heard of the ingot as we intended, and came to protect or retrieve something more." Lawrence's eyes widened, his charm gone. "You set this up? You meddling old—" He stopped. His hands clenched, then sagged. "I didn't steal. The gold. Finch did it, I swear. He offered me a share, said he'd hide it, split the profits. I just checked the well to see if he lied." Miss Marple's gaze was unrelenting, her voice soft as a blade. "Mr. Finch, I think, is no thief, but you, Mr. Grayson, knew the safe's combination. Overheard, perhaps, or charmed from a servant. You met Tommy Walsh, Slade's man, to sell the gold and buried 2 ingots to frame Finch. Where is he, Mr. Grayson? And where is the rest?" Lawrence's face crumpled, his voice a whisper. I don't know where Finch is. I took the gold, yes, needed it for Slade. Hid it in London with Kerr. But Finch saw me, confronted me. I didn't mean to hurt him." Hargreaves stepped forward, his cuffs ready, but Miss Marple raised a hand. "Hurt, Mr. Grayson? Or, worse, speak now, for the truth will out." Lawrence shook his head, tears glinting. "I hit him, knocked him out, hid him in a hut by the river. Didn't kill him, I swear. I just needed time." Miss Marple's heart quickened, her mind on. The fishing huts. "Constable, take Mr. Grayson to the manor, but first search the Daimler. He was seen near it, hiding something." Tompkins searched the car, parked by the manor's stables, and found a hidden compartment under the rear seat. Inside were 3 more ingots, their lion's head stamps gleaming. Lawrence groaned, his resistance gone. "That's all I kept here," he muttered. "The rest is with Kerr." Hargreaves cuffed him, his voice grim. "You're under arrest, Mr. Grayson, for theft and assault, maybe worse." He turned to Miss Marple, his awe barely concealed. "You were right, ma'am. A trap," and he walked in. Miss Marple's needles, tucked in her bag, seemed to hum with satisfaction. "A trap, Constable, works only when the prey is hungry. Mr. Grayson's hunger was his debts, and his fear of Slade. Now, we must find Mr. Finch." The trap had sprung, but the case was not closed. The river huts, Finch's fate, and the red-sealed letter waited. Miss Marple followed Hargreaves to the manor, her umbrella tapping the ground, her mind alight with the next step. In St. Mary Mead, where shadows yielded to light, she was close to the truth. Chapter 10. The Hidden Truth. The 9th day since the theft at Grayson Manor broke with a sky bruised by clouds, the air sharp with the tang of impending frost over St. Mary Mead. Miss Jane Marple sat in her parlour, a fire casting flickering shadows. Across the walls, her breakfast tray bearing a pot of tea and a single poached egg. Though her thoughts consumed her more than hunger, the trap at the Manor's well had ensnared Lawrence Grayson. His confession of theft and assault on Robert Finch, a crack in the case's facade. But the edifice remained incomplete. 3 more ingots found in the Daimler. 5 still hidden with Jimmy Kerr in London and Finch's fate, alive or dead, in a river hut were threads yet to be woven. The red-sealed letter, the spark of Finch's actions, lingered like a ghost, and Miss Marple, with the quiet tenacity of a spider mending its web, resolved to uncover the hidden truth. Her knitting needles lay silent, the pale blue shawl a soft heap in its basket as she reviewed her notes, inscribed in a delicate hand on the end papers of an old recipe book. The flattened grass by the old oak, the new burlap sack in the churchyard. Clara's fear of Victor Slade, and his scarred enforcer, Tommy Walsh, and Lawrence's desperate deal with Kerr formed a mosaic. But its centre, Finch's role and the letter's sender, was obscured. Lawrence's claim of knocking Finch out, not killing him, rang with the desperation of a man clutching at half-truths. Miss Marple recalled a case in St. Mary Mead, where a confession of theft had masked a deeper crime revealed only by a victim's survival. Finch, she sensed, was the key, and the river huts would yield him, or his silence. She penned a note to Constable Hargreaves, her words precise, urgent. Search the fishing huts by the river, near the old oak, for Mr. Finch. Bring a doctor and blankets. He may be injured. I will join you at dawn. Her umbrella, propped by the door, seemed to nod in agreement as she donned her black coat and hat, preparing to meet Hargreaves at the Manor to review Lawrence's confession. The village, she knew, was a cauldron of gossip, and the Blue Boar would be alive with tales of the Wells trap. But her focus was the river, where truth waited in the shadows. The drizzle had ceased, leaving the cobblestones slick as Miss Marple stepped into the village. Eyes followed her from shop windows, and at the newsagent's, Miss Hartnell hailed her, her voice sharp with awe. "Miss Marple, you've done it! Lawrence Grayson, a thief! They say he stole the gold to pay debts, and you caught him at the Well, but where's Finch? The village swears he's dead, buried by the river." Miss Marple's smile was faint, her eyes piercing. "The village, Miss Hartnell, buries the living with ease, but I hope Mr. Finch breathes yet. Truth, like a seed, needs time to surface." She moved on, her mind on Lawrence's panicked claim. Finch in a hut, not dead, but hidden. She recalled Elsie's report of Lawrence's brandy-soaked mutterings about a deal gone wrong and the groom's sighting of him near the Daimler, concealing something. The ingots in the car were part of the truth, but Finch's fate was its heart. At Grayson Manor, Sir Henry received her in the library, its shelves heavy with unread tomes, its air thick with his cigar smoke and disbelief. Lawrence sat in a corner, cuffed, his face pale, his charm shattered. Hargreaves stood by the desk, his notebook trembling, while Sergeant Tompkins guarded the door, his bulk a silent warning. Sir Henry's voice boomed, his moustache quivering. "Miss Marple, you've unmasked my nephew, a thief, in my own house. 3 more ingots found, but 5 gone. And Finch, Lawrence says he's alive, but I don't trust a word. What now?" Miss Marple settled in a leather chair, her umbrella beside her, her voice as soft as a whisper in church. "Now, Sir Henry, we find Mr. Finch, and the truth he carries. Mr. Grayson's confession is a start, but incomplete. He stole the gold, yes, to pay Victor Slade, and hid 3 ingots in the Daimler, 5 with a fence named Kerr in London. 2 in the churchyard were a ruse to blame Finch, whom he claims to have struck and hidden. But why hide a man unless to silence him? We must search the river huts at once. Lawrence's head jerked up, his voice hoarse. I told you, I didn't kill him. Finch caught me in the study, the night I took the gold. He knew the combination, saw me open the safe. I panicked, hit him with a candlestick, dragged him to a hut by the river. He was breathing, I swear. I needed time to move the gold, to deal with Slade. Miss Marple's gaze was unrelenting, her eyes like twin lanterns in the gloom. Time, Mr. Grayson, is a luxury you squandered. You met Tommy Walsh, Slade's man, to arrange the sale, and buried 2 ingots to frame Finch. But Finch's knowledge threatened you. Where is he precisely, and what did he see? Lawrence's hands shook, his voice a plea. The hut nearest the oak, by the river's bend. I tied him, gagged him, locked the door. I meant to let him go after the gold was sold. He saw me take the ingots, knew I'd betray Uncle, that's all. Hargreaves scribbled, his scepticism clear. And the red-sealed letter, Grayson, the one Finch got days before, was that from you or Slade, pushing him to act? Lawrence's eyes widened, his denial swift. Letter? I know nothing of it. Finch never mentioned a letter, only glared at me like he knew my debts. Maybe Slade sent it, I don't know. Miss Marple's needles, produced from her bag, began their quiet dance, a counterpoint to her thoughts. The red-sealed letter, with its crest, was not Lawrence's work. His panic was genuine. But Slade or Walsh remained possibilities. She recalled a case in Danemouth, where a blackmail letter had driven a clerk to steal, his fear of exposure a silent chain. Finch, she thought, had been pressed perhaps by Slade's threats to watch Lawrence or act against him. Constable, she said, we must search the hut at dawn. Mr. Finch, if alive, will tell us more. Sir Henry's fist slammed the desk, his voice a roar. If alive, if my valet is dead, Lawrence, you'll hang. Miss Marple, I trust you. Find him, and the rest of my gold. Miss Marple rose, her umbrella tapping the floor. Trust, sir, Henry, is earned by truth. We shall find both, I hope. She left the manor, the wind sharper now, her mind on the river. Hargreaves promised to assemble a search party, with a doctor from the village, and Miss Marple returned home to prepare. Her cottage a haven of order amid the case's chaos. Lily greeted her with a tray of broth, her eyes wide. Miss Marple, the village is buzzing. Lawrence arrested, 3 more ingots found. But they say Finch is dead, drowned in the river. Is it true? Miss Marple's needles clicked, her voice calm. Drowning, Lily, is a tale for gossip, not fact. Mr. Finch may live, and we shall seek him at dawn. Tell me, has anyone spoken of the river huts, or seen strangers there? Lily shook her head, her apron twisted. Not the huts, miss, but the milkman said he saw a man by the river yesterday, near the oak, skulking like. Couldn't see his face, but he had a limp. Thought it was a poacher, but now I wonder. Miss Marple's heart quickened, her mind on Tommy Walsh, Slade's scarred enforcer, whose limp Craddock had mentioned in a wire. A limp, Lily? That's worth noting. The river draws many eyes, it seems. She sipped her broth, her thoughts racing. Walsh, perhaps, checking on Lawrence's work or seeking Finch. The huts, secluded and silent, were the case's crucible, and dawn would test their secrets. At first light, Miss Marple joined Hargreaves, Tompkins, and Dr. Haydock, a gruff physician with a satchel of bandages at the river's edge. The old oak loomed, its roots sprawling toward the water, the grass still flattened from Finch's lantern-lit search. The fishing huts, 3 weathered shacks, stood in a row, their padlocks glinting in the pale sun. Hargreaves led the way to the nearest, its door secured with a new lock, its wood unweathered, a detail that jarred Miss Marple's sense of place. "New lock," she murmured, her umbrella tapping the ground. "Not a fisherman's choice, I think." Hargreaves nodded, his crowbar ready. "Grayson's work, likely." He pried the door open, the wood splintering, and a musty smell of damp and decay spilled out. Inside, in the dim light, lay Robert Finch, bound, gagged, his face bruised but alive, his eyes blinking against the sudden glare. He was slumped against a wall, his wrists raw from ropes, his breathing shallow but steady. Dr. Haydock knelt, his fingers probing for a pulse. Alive but weak. Concussion, dehydration, needs rest and warmth. Lucky to be breathing, this one. Miss Marple's heart lifted, though her face remained serene. Lucky, Dr. Haydock, or spared for a purpose. Untie him gently, and let him speak when he can. Hargreaves cut the ropes, his oar clear. "You were right, ma'am. Grayson hid him, not killed him. But why?" Finch, freed, coughed, his voice a rasp. "Lawrence took the gold, saw him in the study, confronted him. He hit me, said I'd ruin him." He paused, his eyes haunted. "A letter, red seal, from Slade. Warned me, watch Lawrence, or Clara would pay." Miss Marple's needles in her mind's eye clicked faster. "Slade, Mr. Finch? The letter, what did it say precisely?" Finch's head lolled, his strength fading. "Said Lawrence was stealing owed Slade. If I didn't report him, Clara's flat burned. I wrote to her, warned her, tried to stop Lawrence. Too late." Dr. Haydock intervened, his voice firm. "Enough for now. He needs a bed, not questions." They carried Finch to a cart, blankets wrapped around him, and drove to the village hospital, Miss Marple following, her umbrella a steady rhythm on the path. At the hospital, Finch was settled, his condition stable, and Miss Marple sat by his bed, her voice soft. "Rest, Mr. Finch. You've done bravely. The letter, did you keep it or destroy it?" Finch's eyes closed, his whisper faint. "Burned it, after reading. Didn't want Clara to know. Slade's man, Walsh, was in the village, scarred face, limping." Miss Marple nodded, her mind alight. The red-sealed letter from Slade had coerced Finch to watch Lawrence, protecting Clara at the cost of his own safety. Lawrence, cornered, had struck, hiding Finch to buy time. The hidden truth, Finch's loyalty, Lawrence's betrayal, was clear, but the 5 ingots and Walsh's role remained. She wired Craddock from the hospital. "Finch found alive. Confirms Lawrence's theft. Slade's coercion via letter. Walsh in St. Mary Mead, limping. Search Kerr's warehouse. Gold is there." Returning to her cottage, she found Lily, her eyes wide with news. "Miss Marple, they're saying Finch is alive. The village can't believe it." But the groom saw a limping man by the manor last night, near the stables. Thinks it was a stranger. Miss Marple's needles resumed, their click a pulse of certainty. A stranger Lily, but not unknown. The truth is out, but the gold waits. We are close now. The hidden truth had surfaced, but in St. Mary Mead, where shadows clung, Miss Marple knew the final threads would soon be hers. Chapter 11. The Final Ingots. The 10th day since the theft at Grayson Manor dawned with a brittle frost that silvered the rooftops of St. Mary Mead, the air sharp and still, as if the village held its breath. Miss Jane Marple sat by her parlour window, a fire casting a warm glow across the room, her breakfast tray bearing a pot of tea and a single slice of toast, though her thoughts were far from sustenance. The discovery of Robert Finch, alive but battered in a river hut, had unravelled the heart of the case. Lawrence Grayson's theft of the gold to pay his debts to Victor Slade, his assault on Finch to silence him, and the staged burial of 2 ingots to frame the valet. Yet 5 ingots remained hidden with Jimmy Kerr in London, and Tommy Walsh, Slade's limping enforcer, lurked on the village's fringes, a shadow yet to be dispelled. The red-sealed letter, revealed as Slade's threat to Finch, had ignited the scheme, but its embers still glowed, and Miss Marple, with the quiet precision of a seamstress threading a needle, resolved to recover the final ingots and close the case. Her knitting needles lay dormant, the pale blue shawl a soft heap in, its basket, as she reviewed her notes, etched in a delicate hand on the margins of an old almanac, the flattened grass by the old oak, the new burlap sack in the churchyard, Finch's coerced vigilance over Lawrence, and the 3 ingots in the Daimler formed a tapestry. But its edges, Kerr's warehouse, Walsh's movements, were frayed. Finch's survival, his whispered account of Slade's letter threatening Clara, had shifted the case from theft to coercion, and Miss Marple recalled a case in St. Mary Mead, where a blackmailer's note had driven a gardener to steal. His confession, breaking the chain. Today she would press for the final truth, coordinating with Inspector Craddock in London and watching for Walsh's shadow in the village. She penned a wire to Craddock, her words succinct. Finch confirms Slade's letter. Walsh's presence. Kerr holds 5 ingots. Search his warehouse thoroughly. Walsh may return to St. Mary Mead, limping, scarred. Alert local police. Her umbrella, propped by the door, seemed to stand at attention as she donned her black coat and felt hat, preparing to visit Grayson Manor to update Sir Henry and ensure Finch's safety. The village, she knew, was a furnace of gossip, and the Blue Boar would hum with tales of Finch's rescue, but her focus was London, where the gold waited, and the river, where Walsh's limp had been sighted. The frost crunched under her sensible shoes as she stepped into the village, the lanes quiet, save for the clink of milk bottles and the murmur of early risers. At the bakery, Mrs. Price leaned out, her voice a trumpet of excitement. "Miss Marple, you've saved Finch. The village says he's a hero, not a thief. But the gold, where's the rest? They swear it's buried by the river, guarded by a scarred man." Miss Marple's smile was faint, her eyes keen as a hawk's. "The village, Mrs. Price, weaves tales like a loom, but truth is simpler and often heavier. The gold is not here, I think, but we shall see." She moved on, her mind on Walsh's limp, reported by the milkman and groom near the manor's stables. A scarred man, Slade's enforcer, skulking in St. Mary Mead, suggested a loose end, or a threat. She recalled Elsie's account of Lawrence muttering about Walsh, a deal gone wrong, and resolved to probe further at the inn. At Grayson Manor, Sir Henry received her in the drawing-room, its heavy curtains parted to reveal a frost-laced lawn, its air thick with the scent of his cigar and a new-found humility. Constable Hargreaves stood by the window, his notebook worn but ready, while Sergeant Tompkins lingered by the door, his presence a quiet reassurance. Sir Henry, his face less florid but etched with shame, rose to greet her, his voice subdued. "Miss Marple, you've worked miracles. Finch alive, Lawrence exposed. 3 more ingots found, but 5 gone, and this Slade devil behind it all. What's next? I owe Finch my trust, and you my gratitude." Miss Marple settled in a velvet chair, her umbrella beside her, her voice as soft as a vesper bell. Gratitude, Sir Henry, is best shown by justice. Mr. Finch was coerced by Victor Slade, who threatened his sister to ensure his vigilance over Lawrence. Your nephew stole the gold to pay Slade, hid 3 in the Daimler, and sent 5 to Jimmy Kerr, a London fence. Inspector Craddock is searching Kerr's warehouse, but we must watch for Tommy Walsh, Slade's man, seen limping in the village. He may seek to silence Finch, or reclaim the gold. Hargreaves' pencil scratched, his oar tempered by urgency. "Walsh, ma'am. The milkman saw a limping man by the river, and the groom near the stables. You think he's still here, after Lawrence's arrest?" Miss Marple's gaze was steady, her eyes like twin stars in the morning light. "I think, Constable, that a man like Walsh does not leave until his master's will is done. Slade's letter to Finch with its red seal was a chain, and Walsh its keeper. We must guard Mr. Finch at the hospital, and alert the village to report any strangers." Sir Henry's fist clenched, his voice a growl. "A scarred man, threatening my valet. If he's here, I'll have him. Miss Marple, I've wronged Finch, thought him a thief when he was a victim. I'll raise his pay, give him a holiday, anything he needs." Miss Marple's lips curved, a shadow of approval. "Kindness, Sir Henry, heals where suspicion wounds. But first we must recover the gold and ensure Walsh's capture. Constable, place a man at the hospital and check the river. Huts again. Walsh may return to where Finch was hidden." Hargreaves nodded, his resolve firm. "I'll send Tompkins to the hospital, ma'am, and check the huts myself. If Walsh is skulking, we'll nab him." Miss Marple rose, her umbrella tapping the floor. "Good, Constable, and Sir Henry, speak to your staff. Ask if they've seen a limping man, or heard of Kerr. Small whispers carry truth." She left the manor, the frost melting under a weak sun, her mind on London, where Craddock's search would test her theory, and the village where Walsh's shadow loomed. Her next stop was the Blue Boar Inn, its timbered facade a warm contrast to the chill. The taproom was lively, farmers and shopkeepers debating Finch's rescue over pints, their voices a chorus of awe and speculation. Elsie, the barmaid, spotted Miss Marple and hurried over, her apron dusted with flour. "Miss Marple, you're a legend. Finch alive, Lawrence in cuffs. The village says the rest of the gold's in London, but a limping man was seen by the river last night. Scared the milkman half to death." Miss Marple settled at her corner table, her shawl draped over the chair, her voice low. "A limping man, Elsie, tell me more. Where and when?" Elsie leaned in, her eyes wide. "Just after dusk, ma'am, by the old oak. The milkman was late with his rounds. Saw a man with a scarf over his face, limping toward the huts. Thought he was a tramp, but he moved fast, like he knew the place. Didn't tell Hargreaves yet, only me this morning." Miss Marple's heart quickened, her fingers tracing the rim of her teacup. "Fast, despite a limp. That's a man with purpose, Elsie. Has anyone spoken of Mr. Lawrence's dealings, or a man named Kerr?" Elsie shook her head, pouring tea. Not Kerr, but Lawrence was here before his arrest, muttering about a Jimmy who'd better not cross him. Said it to the barman, drunk on brandy. Could that be your man? Miss Marple nodded, her mind alight. Jimmy Kerr, the fence. Holding the gold, tied to Lawrence's desperation. It could, Elsie. Keep your ears open. Any talk of strangers or the hospital, let me know. She sipped her tea, her thoughts drifting to Walsh. A limping man by the huts after Finch's rescue suggested a hunter seeking his quarry, or a loose end. She recalled a case in Much Benham, where a blackmailer's thug had stalked a witness, caught only by a neighbour's vigilance. St. Mary Mead, she knew, would watch. By afternoon, a telegram from Craddock arrived at her cottage, its words a spark. Kerr's warehouse raided, 5 ingots found, Lyon's head stamp confirmed, Kerr arrested, implicates Lawrence and Walsh. Walsh fled London, likely south. Will alert St. Mary Mead police. Well done. Miss Marple sat by the fire, the telegram in hand, her relief tempered by caution. The final ingots were recovered, but Walsh, Slade's scarred man, was a shadow uncaught, and Finch's safety hung in the balance. She visited the hospital, where Finch lay in a quiet ward, his bruises fading, his strength returning. Dr. Haydock greeted her, his gruff voice softened by respect. "He's mending, Miss Marple. Tough as nails, that one. Says he wants to see you. Something about a letter." Miss Marple settled by Finch's bed, her umbrella propped against the chair, her voice gentle. "Mr. Finch, you've borne much. The gold is found, 5 ingots in London, with Kerr. But Tommy Walsh is near, I fear. Tell me, the red-sealed letter from Slade, did it mention Walsh, or where he might go?" Finch's eyes, clear but haunted, met hers. "The letter said Walsh would watch me, ensure I reported Lawrence's moves. Said he'd be in the village, limping, scarred, to remind me of Clara's danger. I burned it, but Walsh was there, saw him by the manor, the day I confronted Lawrence. If he's back, he's after me, or the gold." Miss Marple's hand rested on his, a rare gesture of comfort. "You're safe now, Mr. Finch. Walsh will be found, and Slade with him. Rest and trust." She left, her mind on Walsh's limp, his return to the huts. Hargreaves, she knew, was searching, and the village's eyes were sharp. That evening, Hargreaves arrived at her cottage, his face flushed with triumph. "Miss Marple, we've got him. Walsh, skulking by the river huts, limping like you said. Tompkins nabbed him, tried to run, but his leg betrayed him. He's in the lock-up, swearing he only watched, didn't steal." Miss Marple's needles resumed, their click a pulse of satisfaction. "Watched, constable, but with intent. Walsh was Slade's chain, binding Finch to fear. He'll talk in time, and Slade will follow. The gold is safe, and Mr. Finch free." Hargreaves grinned, his notebook forgotten. "You're a wonder, ma'am. Sir Henry's overjoyed. Says Finch can have a month's holiday, and he's raising his pay. The village can't stop talking, calling you a detective." Miss Marple's smile was faint, her eyes twinkling. "Detectives, Constable, seek fame, but I seek only truth. The village will find another tale soon enough." She sipped her tea, her thoughts drifting to Clara, who would visit Finch at Christmas, and Slade, whose empire would crumble under Craddock's scrutiny. The final ingots recovered in London had closed the theft, but Walsh's capture sealed the case. As Hargreaves left, Lily burst in, her apron twisted with excitement. "Miss Marple, they've caught the scarred man. The village says you're a hero, like in a book. What's next?" Miss Marple's needles clicked, her voice calm. "Next, Lily, we knit and wait. Truth, like a shawl, takes time to finish. The final ingots were hers, but in St. Mary Mead, where secrets bloomed like frost, Miss Marple knew another puzzle would soon unfold." Chapter 12. The Quiet Village. The 11th day since the theft at Grayson Manor dawned with a gentle thaw, the frost that had silvered St. Mary Mead melting under a pale November sun, leaving the village lanes glistening like polished glass. Miss Jane Marple sat by her parlour fire, a shawl draped over her shoulders, her breakfast tray bearing a pot of Earl Grey and a single currant bun, though her thoughts were far from nourishment. The recovery of the final 5 gold ingots from Jimmy Kerr's London warehouse, the capture of Tommy Walsh by the river huts, and Robert Finch's survival had woven the case to a close. Yet its echoes lingered, like the chime of a church bell, fading into silence. Lawrence Grayson faced trial. Victor Slade's shadow loomed over London's courts, and Claraara Finch prepared to visit her brother for Christmas. But Miss Marple, with the quiet satisfaction of a gardener after harvest, reflected on the human frailties that had sparked the drama. Today, St. Mary Mead would settle into its rhythm, but she knew its quiet was a canvas for future puzzles. Her knitting needles, long neglected, resumed their dance, the pale blue shawl growing under her fingers as she reviewed her notes, inscribed in a delicate hand on the end papers of an old poetry anthology: the flattened grass by the old oak, the new burlap sack in the churchyard, Finch's coerced loyalty under Slade's red-sealed threat, and Lawrence's desperate theft formed a tapestry now complete, its threads tied by Walsh's arrest and Kerr's confession. The case had turned on observation, small things, like a limping stranger or a nervous glance, that the village's gossip had amplified but not understood. Miss Marple recalled a case in St. Mary Mead, where a stolen necklace had been solved by a child's idle remark, and she smiled faintly, knowing human nature, with its greed and loyalty, was the true key. The village was stirring, its pulse quickened by the case's resolution, and Lily, her maid, burst in, her apron dusted with flour, her eyes alight with the morning's chatter. "Miss Marple, you're the talk of St. Mary Mead. They say you're better than Scotland Yard. Finding Finch, catching Lawrence, even nabbing that scarred man. The Blue Boar's full of it, and Sir Henry's sent a basket of apples from the manor, with a note thanking you." Miss Marple's needles paused, her smile gentle but amused. "Apples, Lily. A kind gesture, but I seek no trophies. The village loves a story, but stories end and life goes on. Tell me, what do they say of Mr. Finch and Mr. Grayson?" Lily perched on a chair, her voice a torrent. "Oh, miss, they're calling Finch a saint, nearly killed for his honesty. He's back at the manor, they say, resting, with Sir Henry fussing over him like a mother hen. As for Lawrence, the village says he'll get years in prison, and good riddance, stealing from his own uncle. Mrs. Bantry swears he's off to Australia after, if he's ever free. And the gold? All 10 ingots back, safe in Sir Henry's study, though he's talking of a bank vault now." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, her needles resuming their rhythm. A vault, Lily, is wiser than a safe, though greed tempts even the cautious. Mr. Finch's loyalty was his strength, and Lawrence's weakness his debts. Small things, but they shape us all. She sipped her tea, her thoughts drifting to Clara, whose visit would heal Finch's wounds, and Slade, whose empire would crumble under Inspector Craddock's scrutiny. The village, she knew, would soon find another tale. But for now, its quiet was a balm. By mid-morning, she donned her black coat and felt hat, her umbrella a steadfast companion, and set out for the village, intending to visit the Blue Boar and the church, where Sir Henry had promised a new bell in gratitude for justice served. The lanes were lively, children playing in the puddles left by the thaw, shopkeepers sweeping their steps with renewed vigour. At the newsagent's, Miss Hartnell hailed her, her pince-nez glinting with admiration. "Miss Marple, you've saved us all. Finch alive, the gold recovered, and that villain Lawrence caught. The village owes you a statue, though Mrs. Price says a plaque would do." Miss Marple's smile was faint, her eyes sharp as she adjusted her shawl. "Statues, Miss Hartnell, are for heroes, and I am only a neighbour. The village's eyes saw much, if not clearly. Tell me, has anyone spoken of Mr. Finch's return, or strangers lingering?" Miss Hartnell's voice dropped, her gossip eager. "Finch is back at the manor, ma'am, looking pale but proud. Sir Henry's given him a raise, and a month's. Holiday come spring. No strangers, though. The milkman says the river's quiet now. No limping men. But Mrs. Bantry heard from her maid that Claraara Finch arrives next week to spend Christmas with her brother. Isn't that lovely?" Miss Marple nodded, her heart warmed by Clara's devotion, her mind satisfied by the absence of Walsh's shadow. "Lovely indeed. Families mend like broken threads. Thank you, Miss Hartnell." She moved on, her umbrella tapping the cobbles, her thoughts on the church bell, a chime to mark the village's return to peace, and a reminder of her own quiet, roll in its harmony. The Blue Boar Inn was a warm haven, its taproom bustling with farmers and shopkeepers, their voices a chorus of relief and speculation. Elsie, the barmaid, spotted Miss Marple and hurried over, her apron twisted with excitement. "Miss Marple, you're a miracle. The village can't stop. Finch saved, the gold found, and that scarred man locked up. The barman says Sir Henry's buying a new bell for the church, to thank you. What's your secret, ma'am?" Miss Marple settled at her corner table, her shawl draped over the chair, her voice a gentle murmur. "No secret, Elsie, only watching and listening. The village told me everything, though it often speaks in riddles. Has anyone mentioned Mr. Finch, or any letters from London?" Elsie poured tea, her eyes wide. "Finch, ma'am. He's the hero now. Everyone's saying he stood." Up to Lawrence, nearly paid with his life. No letters. But the groom was in saying Finch got a note from his sister yesterday, full of plans for Christmas. Oh, and Sir Henry was here last night, saying he'll never trust a nephew again, but he trusts Finch like his own son. Miss Marple's fingers traced the teacup's rim, her mind on Clara's note, a promise of reunion and closure. The village's shift from suspicion to admiration for Finch was swift, human nature's pendulum swinging with truth's weight. She recalled a case in Chipping Cleghorn, where a redeemed servant had been welcomed back with open hearts, and Finch, she thought, deserved no less. Trust, Elsie, is a fragile gift, but Mr. Finch has earned it. Keep your ears open. Any talk of London or the manor, let me know. Elsie nodded, her apron a flag of loyalty. I will, ma'am. Oh, and Mrs. Bantry's in the dining room, dying to see you. Says you're a detective in petticoats. Miss Marple's lips curved, a shadow of amusement, as she rose to join Mrs. Bantry, who waved her over with a flourish of her fox fur. And dining room was quieter, its tables set with crisp linen, and Mrs. Bantry, her face alight with delight, patted the chair beside her. Jane, you're a marvel. The gold back, Finch alive, Lawrence in irons. The village is calling you Sherlock, in a shawl, though I say you're better. Tell me, how did you know it wasn't Finch? Miss Marple settled, her umbrella propped against the table, her voice soft as a breeze. I knew, Dolly, because people are patterns, and Mr. Finch's pattern was loyalty, not greed. His room was too orderly for flight, his letter to Clara too protective for theft. Lawrence's debts, his charm, his fear, they wove a different cloth, and the village's whispers helped me cut it. Mrs. Bantry's eyes widened, her voice a stage whisper. And that scarred man, Walsh? They say he's singing like a canary, implicating some London shark. Slade, is it? Oh, Jane, it's like a novel. What's next for you? Another case? Miss Marple's needles, in her mind's eye, clicked with quiet satisfaction. Next, Dolly, I knit and tend my roses. The village will find another drama, and I'll watch, as always. She sipped her tea, her thoughts drifting to Craddock's wire, received that morning, confirming Walsh's confession, and Slade's imminent arrest. The London shark, as Mrs. Bantry called him, had overreached, his red-sealed letter to Finch a misstep that unravelled his scheme. They parted, Mrs. Bantry promising a dinner to celebrate, and Miss Marple walked to the church, where the vicar, Mr. Clement, was overseeing the installation of Sir Henry's bell. The churchyard, once a stage for clues, was peaceful now, its yews whispering in the breeze, its boot-prints faded by rain and time. Mr. Clement greeted her, his face beaming. Miss Marple, you've brought us justice, and Sir Henry's gift. We'll ring it out. The bell arrives next week, a fine bronze, to thank you and the village. Miss Marple's smile was gentle, her eyes tracing the crypt's ivy-clad door. A bell, Mr. Clement, is a voice for truth, and I'm glad to hear it. Tell me, has Mr. Finch visited or spoken of his plans? Mr. Clement nodded, his voice warm. He was here yesterday with Sir Henry, looking stronger. Said he'll stay at the manor, save for his garage dream, and his sister comes for Christmas. A good man, Miss Marple, and you saw it when we didn't. Miss Marple's umbrella tapped, the path, her mind at ease. Goodness, Mr. Clement is quiet, but it endures. The village will cherish him now. She left the churchyard, the sun higher, its light softening the village's edges. St. Mary Mead was quiet, its drama spent, but she knew its heartbeat, with secrets, waiting for another spark. Back at her cottage, she found a letter from Claraara Finch, its handwriting steady, its tone grateful. "Dear Miss Marple, Robert is mending, and I arrive next week to spend Christmas with him. Your kindness saved him and us. If ever you're in London, our door is open. Yours, Clara." Miss Marple folded the letter. Her heart warmed, and placed it in her desk beside Craddock's wire. Slade arrested, charged with blackmail and fencing. Walsh and Kerr testify against him. Your instincts, as ever, impeccable. She sat by. The fire, her knitting resumed, the needles clicking like a heartbeat. Lily brought a tray of scones, her voice soft with awe. "Miss Marple, the village says you're a guardian angel. Sir Henry's at the manor, planning a feast for Finch, and the bell's the talk of the inn. What's it like, solving a mystery?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, her voice a murmur. "It's like knitting, Lily, a tangle of threads pulled gently till they form a shape. The village gave me the yarn, and I only wove it." She sipped her tea, her thoughts on Lawrence, whose trial would mark his fall, and Finch, whose rise would steady the manor. Slade's red-sealed letter, burned but not forgotten, had been the case's spark, and human nature, greedy, loyal, frail, its fuel. As dusk fell, the village settled, its lights glowing like stars in the frost. Miss Marple walked to her garden, her shawl tight against the chill, and studied her roses, their buds closed but promising spring. St. Mary Mead was quiet, its rhythm restored, but she knew its peace was fleeting. A pause between puzzles. The new bell would ring soon, a chime of justice, and she, with her quiet eyes and steady hands, would watch for the next thread to unravel.